You're not real family. Blood matters. Those 6 words delivered in front of neighbors with phones raised sealed Marilyn Rowe's fate. At 70 years old, she watched her adoptive son, Calvin, polished, corporate, cold, slide an eviction notice across her own kitchen table while his wife Tessa smirked like she'd won a game. They filmed her walking out with one suitcase, turning her humiliation into content, her shame into spectacle. Within hours, Marilyn went from mother to ghost, from homeowner to shelter resident, from visible to erased. But here's what Calvin didn't know. The quiet woman he threw away had spent 40 years building an empire in absolute silence. And empires don't collapse. They strike back. Before we dive in, I invite you to follow this story all the way to its final shattering conclusion. Like this video and comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far Marilyn's reckoning travels. The eviction notice landed on the kitchen table with the weight of a verdict. Marilyn Rowe stood at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, scrubbing the same plate for the 3rd time. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. She'd learned long ago to read a room by the quality of its silence, and this silence had teeth. "Did you hear me, Marilyn?" Calvin's voice was crisp, professional, the tone he used in conference rooms when delivering bad news to people whose names he'd never remember. "I said you need to be out by the end of the month." She set the plate in the rack with deliberate care, dried her hands on a towel embroidered with sunflowers, a gift from Calvin's 8th birthday, back when he still called her Mom, without the pause before it. Then she turned. Calvin stood beside the breakfast bar, 6 feet of tailored navy suit and algorithmic confidence. His hairline had receded slightly in the past year, stress carving shallow tributaries across his forehead, but his posture remained boardroom perfect. Behind him, Tessa Vale leaned against the doorframe like a spectator at an execution she'd paid premium seats to watch. Tessa was younger than Calvin by 7 years, all sharp angles and strategic beauty. The kind achieved through disciplined dermatologists and knowing exactly which filters made you look both accessible and unattainable. Her blonde hair fell in salon-perfect waves. Her smile was a scalpel. "End of the month," Marilyn repeated softly. "This is my house, Calvin." "Actually," Tessa said, pushing off the doorframe and clicking across the linoleum in heels that cost more than Marilyn's monthly grocery budget, "it's his house. You signed it over 3 years ago, remember? When you were worried about estate taxes and whatnot." The memory surfaced like a body from deep water. Calvin's concerned face across this same table. "Mom, if something happens to you, the government will take half of this place. Let me handle it. I'll make sure you're protected." She'd signed. Because he was her son. Because she'd raised him to be smart, capable, trustworthy. Because blood or not, love was supposed to mean something. "I remember," Marilyn said quietly. "Good." Calvin pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for Marilyn to do the same. She remained standing. "Look, this isn't personal. Tessa and I have been discussing our financial future, and this property represents a significant asset. The market's strong right now. We have a buyer who's offering cash, well above market value, but they want to close fast." "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" Tessa laughed, a bright, brittle sound like glass breaking in a distant room. "Oh, come on. You're 70 years old, Marilyn. There are programs for people like you. Senior housing, subsidized apartments. You worked as a janitor for what, 40 years? You must qualify for all sorts of assistance." "I raised Calvin," Marilyn said, her voice still calm, still steady, even as something ancient and vast began shifting beneath her surface composure. "I adopted him when he was 3 years old, fed him, clothed him, sat with him through every nightmare, every fever, every parent-teacher conference." "And that was very nice of you," Tessa said, examining her manicure with the focus of a jeweler appraising a diamond. "But let's be honest about what that was. You couldn't have biological children, so you went to an agency and picked out a kid like he was a rescue dog. You got your maternal satisfaction. He got a roof and some meals. But biology is biology, Marilyn. You're not his real mother. You're just the woman who raised him." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. Calvin didn't contradict her, didn't defend Marilyn, didn't even flinch. He just sat there, checking his phone. "I see," Marilyn said. Something in her tone made Calvin look up. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then Tessa's hand settled on his shoulder, possessive and reassuring, and the moment passed. "We'll give you 6 weeks instead of 4, Calvin said, his generosity tone activated like a software feature. "That's fair. More than fair, actually. And obviously you can take your personal belongings. We're not monsters." "How kind," Marilyn murmured. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." Calvin stood, buttoning his jacket with the smooth efficiency of a man who'd just closed a deal. "I'll have my attorney draw up the formal notice. In the meantime, you might want to start looking at options. I can send you some links to senior living facilities if you want." "That won't be necessary. Suit yourself." He headed for the door, Tessa trailing behind him like expensive perfume. Then he paused, turned back. "And Marilyn, I'd appreciate it if you didn't make this awkward. No drama, no guilt trips. We're all adults here." They left. Marilyn stood in the kitchen, her kitchen, where she'd taught Calvin to crack eggs and tie his shoes, where she'd celebrated his graduation and nursed him through his first heartbreak, and listened to his Tesla pull out of the driveway with the whisper-quiet arrogance of engineered luxury. Then she walked to the kitchen table, picked up the eviction notice, and read it carefully. Every word, every clause, every signature. When she finished, she folded it precisely in thirds and placed it in the drawer where she kept important documents. Birth certificates, insurance papers, the deed Calvin had convinced her to sign over for her own protection. Then Marilyn Rowe went upstairs to her bedroom, opened her closet, and pulled out a leather-bound journal she hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside, written in her careful, steady handwriting, were 40 years of numbers. Well, 5 weeks later, the Greyhound station at 2 in the morning smelled like industrial cleaner, old coffee, and other people's exhaustion. Marilyn sat on a plastic chair bolted to the floor, her entire life compressed into 2 suitcases and a canvas bag. She wore her good coat, the navy one she saved for church, and sensible shoes. Her hair was pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn to work every day for 4 decades. Around her, the terminal's fluorescent lights hummed their insomniac song. A young mother tried to soothe a crying baby. 2 men argued in rapid Spanish. A security guard walked past without seeing anyone, his eyes trained on some distant point beyond human relevance. Marilyn checked her watch. 3 more hours until the first bus to downtown Chicago. She hadn't told Calvin she was leaving, hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't given him the satisfaction of a forwarding address. She'd simply packed what fit, left the keys on the kitchen counter, and walked out the same door she'd entered 47 years ago as a new mother, terrified and determined, and completely in love with the 3-year-old boy who'd looked at her and said, "Are you my mama now?" Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Locks changed, don't come back. C." No mom, not even Marilyn, just C. She deleted the message and put the phone away. The baby across the terminal finally quieted. The mother slumped in her chair, looking like she'd run a marathon in the dark. Their eyes met across the space between them. 2 women, 2 generations, 2 kinds of tired that had no vocabulary. The mother offered a weak smile. Marilyn nodded back. Then the PA system crackled to life, announcing the 4:47 to Chicago, and Marilyn stood, shouldered her bag, and joined the line of people heading somewhere else. Tron. The Grace Cathedral Community Shelter occupied the basement of a church on Chicago's south side. Marilyn arrived just after dawn, following directions from a social worker she'd called from a gas station payphone because her cell battery had died and she didn't have anywhere to charge it. The intake coordinator was a tired woman named Denise, who looked 50 but was probably 35, wearing a name tag and the specific weariness of someone who'd heard every story twice. "First time homeless?" Denise asked, not looking up from her paperwork. "Yes." "Family situation?" "Yes." "Substance issues, mental health concerns, history of violence?" "No." "Any income or savings?" Marilyn hesitated. "No." It wasn't technically a lie. The accounts existed, had existed for 40 years, growing with the patience of compound interest and careful reinvestment. But Marilyn Rowe, janitor, had no access to them. The woman who'd built that empire had to stay buried a little longer. "All right, let me..." Denise handed her a bedding pack and a laminated card with shelter rules. Doors open at 6 p.m., closed at 8 a.m. No drugs, no alcohol, no violence. You get a mat and a locker. Dinner at 7. Breakfast at 6:30. You cause problems, you're out. Questions? Where do people go during the day? Library's warm. Some of the churches do lunch programs. There's a day center 2 blocks east that's open until 4. Denise finally looked up, and something in her expression softened microscopically. You got people you can call? No. Well, Denise pulled a photocopied resource sheet from a stack and circled 3 items with a highlighter. These are job programs for seniors. This one helps with emergency housing vouchers. This one's a food pantry that doesn't ask questions. Go to all 3. Fill out every form they give you. Check back with me in a week. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Denise was already looking past her to the next person in line. Surviving's the easy part. Living takes longer. Marilyn learned the architecture of invisibility. She learned that public library bathrooms were the best place to maintain dignity, clean, private, with soap and paper towels. She learned which churches served lunch without requiring you to listen to a sermon first, and which ones counted attendance like currency. She learned the art of walking with purpose so people assumed you had somewhere to be, and how to make a single cup of coffee last 3 hours in a diner booth during the coldest part of the afternoon. She learned that at 70 years old, in thrift store clothes and sensible shoes, she had achieved a kind of social transparency. People looked through her the way you look through window glass, aware that something is there, but not what it is. The job applications were exercises in rejection. We're looking for someone with more current experience. The position requires physical stamina. We've decided to go with another candidate. Have you considered retirement? One manager at a grocery store actually said it out loud. Look, ma'am, I'm sure you're a hard worker, but customers like to see younger faces. It's just the reality of retail. Marilyn thanked her for her time and left. 3 weeks into shelter life, she finally got a call back, a janitorial position at a corporate office complex downtown. Night shift, minimum wage. The supervisor was a man named Rick who interviewed her in a supply closet that smelled like ammonia and resignation. You ever worked cleaning before? He asked, clipboard in hand. 40 years, Marilyn said. Commercial buildings, mostly. I know every chemical, every floor type, every trick for getting stains out of carpet. Rick squinted at her like she was a math problem that didn't add up. Where'd you work? She named a management company that had gone bankrupt 15 years ago. Untraceable. Safe. References? Lost them in a move? Uh-huh. Rick chewed on his pen. Look, I'll be straight with you. You're old. You're probably going to call in sick a lot, or hurt yourself, or file some kind of workers' comp thing. Why should I take that risk? Marilyn looked at him, really looked at him, until he shifted uncomfortably in his cheap office chair. Because I'll show up, she said quietly, every shift, on time. I won't complain. I won't gossip. I won't steal. I'll do the work nobody else wants to do, in the places nobody else wants to see. And when I'm done, everything will be clean. That's why. Rick stared at her for a long moment. Then he tossed the clipboard on his desk. Fine. 4 nights a week, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. You miss 2 shifts, you're done. Payday is Friday. Uniform's on you. Black pants, white shirt, closed-toe shoes, you start Monday. Thank you. Yeah, well, don't make me regret it. She didn't tell him that she'd once owned a building almost identical to the one she'd be cleaning, that she understood commercial real estate, investment portfolios, and market timing better than he understood his own budget spreadsheet. She just nodded, shook his hand, and left. The corporate complex was called Riverside Tower, 37 floors of glass and steel overlooking the Chicago River. Marilyn's domain was floors 15 through 22, executive offices, conference rooms, and the kind of understated luxury that people who make 7 figures pretend not to notice. She worked alone, moving through silent spaces like a ghost in a building full of ghosts. Empty desks with family photos, whiteboards covered in strategy maps and acronyms, coffee cups with lipstick stains and motivational quotes. She cleaned them all, vacuumed carpets, emptied trash, wiped down surfaces, scrubbed toilets, reset conference rooms, restocked paper towels. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Her body remembered the rhythms even after 3 years away. The efficient path through a room, the exact pressure needed to clean glass without streaking, the way to lift heavy trash bags without straining her back. But her mind was somewhere else. On the 17th floor, she cleaned the office of someone named Marcus Chen, VP of Strategic Development. His desk held a framed photo of 2 kids in soccer uniforms, a Harvard diploma on the wall, and a printout of an email chain about quarterly projections. Marilyn emptied his trash and noticed the discarded draft of a memo about downsizing the facilities department. 15 jobs. Gone by next quarter. She moved on. On the 19th floor, she found evidence of an affair. Romantic text messages left open on someone's second monitor, deleted too late to avoid the IT backup protocol. The person's wedding ring sat in a desk drawer, removed during work hours, replaced before going home. She cleaned the desk without judgment and moved on. On the 22nd floor, in the executive suite where the real decisions happened, she found what she'd been looking for, a document labeled Confidential, Q4 Acquisition Strategy. Marilyn paused, vacuum in hand, and read. Then she pulled out her phone, the old flip phone she'd bought at a drugstore with shelter residents discount, and took a photo. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just for insurance. Because Marilyn Rowe had learned something important in 40 years of being invisible. People tell their secrets to empty rooms. They leave their vulnerabilities scattered like loose change. They forget that the woman pushing the vacuum has eyes, ears, and a memory that doesn't delete. She finished the floor and moved on. 6 weeks into her new life, Marilyn sat in Millennium Park on her day off, watching tourists take selfies with the Cloud Gate sculpture. The sun was warm. The sky was impossible blue. People laughed and posed and moved through their lives like extras in a film about happiness. Her phone rang. Calvin. She stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Hello? Marilyn. His voice was clipped, business formal. I need you to sign some documents. The sale fell through on the house. Buyer's financing collapsed. We're going with a different offer, but they want clear title confirmation. I'm sending a courier to wherever you're staying. Just sign and send them back. I'm homeless, Calvin. Silence. What? I'm homeless, she repeated calmly. I'm staying in a shelter. I work nights cleaning office buildings. I eat 1 meal a day. I haven't had a full night's sleep in 6 weeks, so I'm not sure how you plan to send a courier. More silence, then. There are resources, programs. You should have asked you for help. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Marilyn watched a young couple argue near the fountain, their body language sharp with the kind of conflict that either ends relationships or defines them. Is there anything else? Look, I don't know what you want me to say. You're an adult. You made choices. We all have to live with our choices. Yes, Marilyn said softly. We do. So you'll sign the documents? No. Excuse me? I won't sign them, Calvin. You took my house. You evicted me from my home. You filmed it like content for your personal entertainment. You let your wife call me not real family while you stood there and checked your phone. So no, I will not make your life easier. Jesus Christ, Marilyn, this is exactly the kind of drama I asked you to avoid. You're being... She hung up. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath 47 years of endurance and compromise and swallowed anger, something that had been sleeping for a very long time opened one eye and smiled. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Marilyn stood in line at a grocery store on Madison Street, holding a basket with 3 items, bread, peanut butter, and a bunch of bananas going brown at the edges. Discount groceries for discount lives. The cashier was a teenager with earbuds in, scanning items with the enthusiasm of someone doing math homework underwater. The line behind Marilyn grew longer. Office workers on lunch break, students grabbing snacks, mothers with cartfuls of family-sized everything. 12:47, the cashier announced without looking up. Marilyn pulled out her EBT card, the food assistance card she'd finally qualified for after 3 weeks of paperwork and verification appointments. She'd cried in the social services office when it was approved, Not from gratitude, but from the specific humiliation of needing it. She swiped the card. Declined. Try again, the cashier said, still not making eye contact. Marilyn swiped again. Declined. There should be funds on this, Marilyn said quietly. I just got it loaded last week. The cashier sighed, a sound perfected by teenagers worldwide to convey maximum inconvenience. She picked up a phone, called someone, explained the situation in a tone that suggested Marilyn was personally responsible for computer errors. The line behind her muttered and shifted. Someone checked their phone aggressively. Someone else sighed loud enough to be heard in the next zip code. System says your account's been flagged for verification, the cashier finally announced. You have to call the number on the back of the card. But I have food here. Can I? Ma'am, I can't process the transaction if the card's declined. You'll have to step aside. I have cash, Marilyn said, even though she didn't, not enough anyway. She'd used her last $20 on laundromat quarters yesterday. She opened her wallet, knowing what she'd find. $3 bills, some change, a photo of Calvin at his college graduation. $12.47, the cashier repeated. Marilyn pulled out the $3 and started counting change. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, sorting them on the counter with fingers that had started to shake. Behind her, someone said, "Oh my God, seriously?" "Some of us have jobs to get back to," another voice added. The coins kept slipping. Her hands wouldn't cooperate. She was trying to count, but the numbers wouldn't stay still, and there were too many eyes, too many voices, too much noise. A quarter rolled off the counter, then a dime, then several pennies scattering across the floor in a bright cascade of worthlessness. Marilyn knelt. She was 70 years old, in a grocery store on Madison Street, crawling on tile that smelled like floor wax and 1,000 dirty shoes, picking up coins one at a time while strangers watched and waited and judged. Someone's phone camera clicked. Someone laughed, quickly stifled, but she heard it. The cashier said something to the person behind Marilyn in line, something that included the word pathetic, and they both pretended Marilyn couldn't hear. She gathered the last penny, stood, and placed $11.63 on the counter. "I'll put the bananas back," she said. The cashier, already scanning the next customer's items, waved dismissively at the basket. "Whatever." Marilyn left with bread and peanut butter. She walked 4 blocks before she had to stop, press her back against a building, and breathe through the rage that was trying to crack her ribcage from the inside. Not at the cashier, not even at the people in line. At Calvin. At Tessa. At every choice, every moment, every compromise that had led her from mother to ghost to a woman, counting pennies on a dirty floor while strangers documented her humiliation. She stood there until her breathing steadied. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. "Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "James Whitmore, please. Tell him it's Marilyn Rowe." A pause. 1 moment. 45 seconds of hold music. Then, "Marilyn?" James Whitmore's voice was exactly as she remembered. Warm, precise, expensive. "Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for 2 months. Your phone's disconnected, your emails bounce back, and you're not at the house." "I need to see you," Marilyn said. "Today." "Of course. Are you all right? You sound—" "I'm done hiding, James. Set up the meeting. All of them. Every account, every investment, every asset. I want the full picture." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "You're sure?" Marilyn thought about the eviction notice, the shelter mat, the grocery store floor, Calvin's voice. "You're not his real mother." "I'm sure," she said. "When?" "Now." Not. The offices of Whitmore and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a building Marilyn technically owned a 6% stake in, though the management company had no idea their landlord had just ridden the service elevator in a thrift store coat. James Whitmore met her in the lobby personally, a rarity for a senior partner whose hourly rate could pay most people's monthly rent. He was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a suit that cost more than Marilyn's first car. "Marilyn!" He clasped her hands with genuine warmth. "It's good to see you, though I wish you'd called sooner." "I needed to understand something first," she said. "And do you?" "Yes." He studied her face, the shelter-worn exhaustion, the thrift store coat, the specific weariness of someone who'd been grinding herself down to fit into spaces too small for her actual size. "Let's go to the conference room," he said quietly. They walked through corridors of polished marble and muted luxury. Associates nodded at James with the deference reserved for men who control other people's money with terrifying competence. No one looked at Marilyn. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a table that could seat 20. And waiting for them, 3 other people Marilyn recognized immediately: Sarah Chen, her investment manager; Marcus Okoye, her real estate attorney; and Patricia Hammond, the CPA who'd been handling Marilyn's account since 1987. They all stood when she entered. "Mrs. Rowe," Sarah said, "it's been too long." "Sit," Marilyn said. "All of you." They sat. James opened a leather portfolio and slid it across the table. "This is current as of this morning, full accounting of all assets, investments, holdings, and liquid accounts." Marilyn opened it. The first number she saw made her breath catch. Total net worth, $127,047,362. She'd known it was substantial, had watched it grow year after year, decade after decade, from careful investments and patient timing. But seeing it spelled out, every dollar, every cent, every year of invisible work transformed into undeniable power, was different. "The portfolio's up 18% this year," Sarah said, sliding a second document across the table. "Your tech holdings have been particularly strong. The real estate acquisitions from 2019 are now worth triple what we paid, and the municipal bonds are steady as always." "The Chicago properties alone are worth $42 million, Marcus added. "You own 6 commercial buildings, 3 residential complexes, and 1 parking structure that generates passive income of approximately $90,000 a month." Patricia leaned forward. "Marilyn, we've been trying to reach you because there are tax optimization strategies we need to implement before year end. Also, the foundation you established, the one for elder services and housing assistance, it's been sitting dormant. We need guidance on how you want those funds deployed." Marilyn looked at each of them in turn. "I want you to arrange a meeting," she said, "tomorrow, at the house on Maple Street, the one I signed over to my son 3 years ago." "That property's been listed for sale," Marcus said carefully. "I know. Cancel the listing. Use whatever legal mechanism necessary, but I want access to that house tomorrow at 2 p.m. And I want Calvin and Tessa Vale there. Tell them it's regarding the title issue. Make it sound urgent, unavoidable." "And if they refuse?" Marilyn smiled, a small, cold expression that made everyone at the table shift slightly. "They won't refuse," she said. "Not when they think money's involved." James steepled his fingers, studying her with the focus of someone watching a chess master position their pieces. "What are you planning?" "Consequences," Marilyn said softly, delivered with interest. The conference room fell silent, except for the ambient hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic 42 floors below. Sarah Chen exchanged a glance with Marcus Okoye. Patricia Hammond's pen hovered over her legal pad, frozen mid-note. James Whitmore was the first to speak. "Marilyn, I need to be clear about something. What you're describing, confronting your son in the property he believes he owns, revealing assets he has no knowledge of, this isn't just family drama. This is a financial reconfiguration with legal implications. I need to know you've thought this through." "I've had 6 weeks living in a shelter to think it through," Marilyn said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet that makes people lean forward to hear better. 6 weeks sleeping on a mat surrounded by women who lost everything to men who promised to protect them. 6 weeks watching my son ignore my calls while I stood in line for free lunch. I've thought about nothing else." "And you're certain about tomorrow?" Marcus asked. "We can move more slowly, establish leverage gradually, give you time to what? Reconsider? Forgive him without consequences?" Marilyn shook her head. "No, tomorrow. 2 p.m. Make it happen." Patricia set down her pen with the deliberate care of someone choosing words like surgical instruments. "There's the matter of your current living situation. You shouldn't be in a shelter, Marilyn. We can arrange hotel accommodations immediately, or if you prefer, one of your residential properties has a vacant unit that's been fully furnished for staging. You could move in today. Not yet. Why not? Because Calvin needs to see what he created, Marilyn said. He needs to understand the full weight of his choices before I show him mine. If I show up tomorrow in designer clothes, staying at the Drake, he'll dismiss it as theater. But if I show up exactly as I am, wearing thrift store polyester, smelling like industrial soap from a shelter bathroom, he can't deny the reality. He can't pretend it didn't happen. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. You're not just confronting him. You're building a case. I'm telling the truth, Marilyn corrected. In a way that can't be ignored or reframed, my appearance becomes evidence. Dangerous evidence, James warned. If he's truly as callous as you've described, seeing you like this might not trigger shame. It might trigger defensiveness, anger. He could lash out. Let him. Marilyn's hands were steady on the conference table. No tremor, no hesitation. I've spent 47 years managing his emotions, anticipating his needs, making myself smaller so he could feel larger. I'm done protecting him from discomfort. Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing with the focused intensity of a lawyer translating intention into action. I'll need to review the property transfer documents you signed. If there are any irregularities, and given the circumstances you've described, there almost certainly are, we may be able to challenge the transfer on grounds of undue influence or fraud. There's also the matter of the foundation, Patricia said, flipping through pages of financial records. You established it 7 years ago with an initial $50 million endowment. The charter specifies support for elder dignity initiatives, housing assistance, and financial literacy programs. But you never activated it. The funds have just been sitting there, growing. I wasn't ready, Marilyn said quietly. I thought if I kept my head down, kept quiet, kept being useful, that would be enough. That Calvin would see me, value me, remember who raised him. She paused, looking out at the lake where sailboats cut white lines through blue water. I was wrong. So you're ready now? Sarah asked. To activate the foundation? Yes. To make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other women whose children decide they're disposable? Absolutely. Marilyn turned back to face the table. But first tomorrow. I need you all there. Not as lawyers or advisors, as witnesses. Witnesses to what? James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. To the exact moment Calvin Vale realizes his mother wasn't the powerless woman he threw away, Marilyn said. To the second he understands that the janitor he erased from his life was actually the architect of an empire he never knew existed. To his face when I show him that blood doesn't determine family, choices do. And his choices unmade us. The room absorbed this in weighted silence. Then Patricia spoke, her voice gentle but firm. You know there's no coming back from this. Once you reveal who you really are, what you've really built, the relationship changes permanently. Even if he apologizes, even if he begs forgiveness, the power dynamic shifts in ways that can't be undone. Good, Marilyn said. It should have shifted 47 years ago when I became his mother, but I let him believe the lie that biology matters more than love, that wealth matters more than character, that I was lucky to have him instead of him being lucky to have me. Tomorrow, the truth gets its turn. James closed his portfolio with decisive finality. Then we have work to do. Marcus, pull every document related to the property transfer. Sarah, prepare a comprehensive portfolio summary, something visual, undeniable. Patricia, I want a full accounting of the foundation's current assets and a preliminary deployment strategy. And someone needs to coordinate with the title company to ensure we have legal access to the property tomorrow. I'll handle the property access, Marcus said, already dialing. If the house is technically still in transition, we can argue legitimate interest for title verification. Worst case, we cite Marilyn's prior residency and request a final walkthrough. They can't refuse that. What about Mrs. Vale? Sarah asked. Tessa, should we anticipate her presence as a complication? Tessa will absolutely be there, Marilyn said. She's the one who orchestrated most of this. Calvin's weak. He needed permission to be cruel. She gave it to him, wrapped it in financial strategy and social Darwinism, made him believe that discarding me was actually a sign of strength. Then we prepare for her too, James said. People like that. They double down when threatened. Expect her to attack your credibility. question your mental state, suggest you're being manipulated by us. Marilyn smiled that cold, precise smile again. Let her try. I have recordings. Every head at the table snapped toward her. Recordings, Patricia said carefully. Of what exactly? Of the eviction conversation. Of Tessa saying I'm not real family. Of Calvin agreeing to film me leaving for his own entertainment. Marilyn pulled out her ancient flip phone, the drugstore special that looked like a relic from 2005. It's not much, but it's enough. Their voices, their words, their choices. That's Illinois, Marcus said immediately, his lawyer brain shifting into overdrive. Two-party consent state. If they didn't know you were recording, I wasn't planning to use it in court, Marilyn interrupted. I was planning to use it in that living room with all of you as witnesses, not as legal evidence, as moral proof. So when Tessa tries to rewrite history, I can press play and let them hear themselves. Sarah let out a low whistle. You really have thought this through. For 6 weeks, Marilyn repeated, while scrubbing toilets in buildings I own, while being invisible in a world I helped build. You learn things when people think you're powerless. You see the machinery clearly. All right, James said, standing. We reconvene here tomorrow at noon. Final preparations, coordinate timing, make sure we're presenting a unified front. Marilyn, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you certain you don't want to stay somewhere other than the shelter tonight? I'm certain. Even knowing tomorrow changes everything? Especially knowing that. They filed out one by one, each shaking her hand or squeezing her shoulder with the careful respect people show when they realize they've underestimated someone profoundly. Marcus promised property access by noon. Sarah committed to having portfolio documents ready by 10 a.m. Patricia said she'd prepare foundation activation paperwork, pending Marilyn's final approval. Only James remained when the room emptied. You're enjoying this, he said quietly. Not the revenge, the reclamation. You're stepping back into yourself. I never left myself, Marilyn corrected. I just learned to hide her. Tomorrow, she stops hiding. And if Calvin doesn't respond the way you hope, if he's truly incapable of seeing what he's done, Marilyn gathered her thrift store coat and her canvas bag with the dignity of someone putting on armor. Then I'll know for certain what I already suspect, that I raised a son who values portfolio statements more than people, and I'll move forward accordingly. Which means disinheritance, complete financial separation, and a foundation dedicated to making sure other elderly women have resources when their children decide quarterly profits matter more than gratitude. She paused at the door. Either way, I win. Either I get my son back or I stop losing myself trying to matter to someone who's already decided I don't. James nodded slowly. I'll see you tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow, Marilyn agreed. She took the elevator down 42 floors, walked 6 blocks to the bus stop, and rode back to the south side with her secrets intact and her endgame finally in motion. The shelter felt different that night, not better. Still the same stained mats and industrial lighting and ambient despair of too many lives in too small a space. But Marilyn moved through it with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the cage door is already open. She just hasn't walked through it yet. Denise, the intake coordinator, caught her during dinner service. You look different. Good different. Something happened? I made some phone calls, Marilyn said, accepting a tray with something that might have been meatloaf in a previous life. Job calls? Life calls. Denise studied her with the sharp assessment of someone who'd seen 1,000 transformations, most of them temporary. You leaving us? Soon. Good. You don't belong here. Denise lowered her voice. No offense, but you never did. Most folks who end up here, there's usually something. Addiction, mental health, bad decisions stacked on bad luck. You? You move like someone who's just visiting hell on a day pass. Maybe I was, Marilyn said quietly, learning the landscape. For what? For when I build something better. Denise smiled. A real smile, not the professional social worker expression she wore like a uniform. Well, when you do, remember where you started. Sometimes the people who've been at the bottom build the strongest foundations. They know what actually matters. I will, Marilyn promised. She meant it. That night, lying on her mat while 3 dozen other women coughed and shifted and dreamed their separate dreams of somewhere else, Marilyn didn't sleep. She planned. Every word she'd say, every document she'd reveal, every moment choreographed with the precision of someone who'd spent 6 weeks understanding exactly what she'd lost and exactly what she was about to reclaim. At 4:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Property access confirmed. 2 p.m. CV and TV both notified, both confirmed attendance. Legal grounds. Title verification required for pending sale. You're listed as interested party due to prior residency claim. Lock code being reset to your specification at 1:45 p.m. You'll be able to enter before they arrive. Marilyn typed back, "Thank you." Then she added, "Change the lock code to 0328. March 28th, the day she'd brought Calvin home from the adoption agency, the day she'd become a mother, the day her life had split into before and she'd chosen after without hesitation. Let that number grant her access tomorrow. Let that be the first truth they stumbled into." Marcus replied, "Done. See you at noon." Marilyn put the phone away and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, the reckoning. Tonight, the last sleep of a woman the world had decided was finished. She smiled in the darkness. They had no idea how wrong they were. Morning came with the usual shelter chaos. Women packing mats, arguing over bathroom access, grabbing breakfast before the 8 a.m. exodus when the doors closed until evening. Marilyn moved through it methodically, consuming a piece of toast and weak coffee, using the bathroom to wash her face and tame her hair into its customary bun. She dressed carefully. The same thrift store navy coat, the same worn black pants, the same sensible shoes that had walked her through 6 weeks of invisibility. No jewelry except the small cross necklace she'd worn since Calvin was 8 and gave it to her for Mother's Day, saving his allowance for 3 months. She wondered if he'd remember it. Probably not. At 10:30 a.m., she rode the bus downtown, watching Chicago slide past the windows in its usual Tuesday rhythm. People heading to lunch meetings, students with backpacks, delivery trucks double-parked with their hazards blinking. Life. Proceeding with complete indifference to the fact that Marilyn Rowe was about to stop being invisible. The Whitmore and Associates conference room was already full when she arrived. James, Sarah, Marcus, and Patricia sat around the table with documents arranged in precise stacks. A laptop was open and connected to the room's presentation screen. Everything ready. "Marilyn," James said, standing. "We're prepared. Portfolio summary on screen when you need it. Foundation documents here. Property transfer files with highlighted irregularities here. And Marcus has the recording device ready if you want the eviction audio available." "I have it on my phone," Marilyn said. "We made a backup copy with better audio quality," Marcus said, sliding a small digital recorder across the table. "Cleaned up the background noise, normalized the levels. If you're going to play it, make it count." Marilyn picked up the recorder, tested it briefly. Calvin's voice, cold and corporate, filled the conference room. "I need you to be out by the end of the month," then clicked it off. "Perfect," she said. Sarah gestured to the presentation screen where a portfolio summary glowed with undeniable clarity. Rowe Family Trust, total assets, $127,362.18. Below it, a breakdown by category. Real estate, securities, bonds, liquid accounts, alternative investments. "I kept it simple," Sarah said. "One page, big numbers, no room for confusion. When you're ready, we display this and let them process it." "And the foundation?" Marilyn asked. Patricia opened a leather folder containing papers with official seals and legal language. "Activation paperwork complete. $50 million initial deployment focused on 3 areas. Emergency housing vouchers for displaced seniors, legal advocacy for elder financial abuse cases, and financial literacy programs in underserved communities. The moment you sign these documents, the foundation goes live." "What's it called?" Marilyn asked quietly. "Currently, it's registered as the Rowe Foundation for Elder Dignity," Patricia said, "but we can change the name to anything you prefer." Marilyn thought about the grocery store floor, the shelter mat, the women she'd met who'd been erased by children, partners, systems that decided they didn't matter anymore. "Keep it," she said. Dignity. That's what gets stolen first. Let's make it harder to take. Then we're ready, James said, checking his watch. It's 11:47. We should leave by 12:15 to arrive before them. You'll enter first, get settled, establish your ground. We'll arrive at 1:55, park discreetly, and enter only when you signal us. That gives you a few minutes alone with them before we provide reinforcement. How will you know when to enter? Marilyn asked. Marcus smiled. We gave you a panic button app on a burner smartphone. It's in your bag. One press. We're through the door in 30 seconds. You don't need to wait until things get ugly. If you want us there, we're there. Marilyn looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd protected her fortune for decades, who could have stolen millions without her ever knowing, who instead had grown her nest egg with patient expertise and now stood ready to help her deploy it as a weapon of accountability. Thank you, she said simply, for all of it, for believing me, for being here. Marilyn, Sarah said gently, you've made us all very wealthy over the years through management fees alone. The least we can do is show up when you need us. It's more than that, Marilyn said. You're treating me like I matter. That's not about money. James came around the table and took her hands, his grip warm and steady. You've always mattered. You just surrounded yourself with people who couldn't see it. Today, we make them look. They left the building at 12:20, 3 cars in careful convoy. James drove Marilyn in his Mercedes, maintaining careful distance from the follow vehicles. They didn't speak much during the drive. Marilyn watched the city transform from downtown glass towers to residential neighborhoods where trees still had room to grow and houses remembered what porches were for. The house on Maple Street looked exactly as she'd left it 6 weeks ago. White colonial with black shutters. Neat lawn. The maple tree in the front yard showing early autumn color. Her home. The place she'd raised a child, buried a marriage when Calvin's adoptive father died of cancer, and built a life from careful choices and patient love. Calvin's Tesla wasn't in the driveway yet. You have the new code, Marcus said from the back seat. 0328. We changed it an hour ago. They'll be using the old code, which won't work. They'll have to knock. Or call a locksmith, Patricia added. Either way, you control access, Sarah said. You decide when they enter. Marilyn nodded. She got out of the car, walked up the front path she'd walked 10,000 times before, and punched in the code that represented the beginning of her motherhood. The door unlocked with a soft click. She stepped inside. The house smelled different. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Like someone had been burning different candles, cooking different meals, living a different life in the spaces she'd occupied. The furniture was mostly the same, but rearranged. Photos of Calvin and Tessa had replaced the family pictures she'd hung. The curtains were new, expensive, impersonal. Marilyn walked through the living room, running her fingers along the mantel where Calvin's school photos used to march chronologically from gap-toothed first grader to college graduate. All gone now, replaced by abstract art and a vase that cost more than her weekly shelter meal budget. She went to the kitchen. Her kitchen. The place where she'd taught Calvin to make pancakes, where they'd had homework battles and teenage arguments and all the messy, necessary conversations that build a family. Someone had renovated. New countertops, new appliances, new everything, as if erasing her presence required erasing every surface she'd touched. Marilyn made herself a cup of tea using the fancy espresso machine she didn't recognize, found her old chair at the kitchen table, the only piece of furniture they'd kept, probably because it matched, and sat down to wait. At 1:52 p.m., gravel crunched in the driveway. Car doors opened and closed with the solid thunk of German engineering. Voices. Calvin's baritone and Tessa's soprano, discussing something about contractor estimates and resale value. Footsteps on the porch, a key in the lock. Silence. The key trying again. More silence. Then Tessa's voice, sharp with irritation. Did you give them the wrong code? I gave them the code we use, Calvin said. Try yours. Beeping. Failed entry tone. What the hell? Tessa muttered. Marilyn stood, walked to the front door, and opened it. Calvin and Tessa stood on the porch, frozen in the specific tableau of people whose world has just tilted sideways. Calvin was dressed for business casual. Blazer, no tie, designer jeans that probably cost $400. Tessa wore athleisure that cost even more, her hair perfect, her makeup camera ready. They stared at Marilyn like she was a ghost who'd forgotten to stay dead. "Hello, Calvin," Marilyn said quietly. "Hello, Tessa. Please come in." Calvin recovered first, his corporate training kicking in like muscle memory. His face smoothed into professional neutrality, though his eyes remained sharp with confusion and something that might have been concern if you looked generously. "Marilyn," he said, stepping into the foyer with the careful confidence of someone reclaiming territory. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I changed the locks," Marilyn said simply, closing the door behind them. "And I live here. Or I did, until you decided otherwise." Tessa's laugh was high and brittle, the sound of someone trying to convert shock into control. "You live in a shelter, Marilyn. You told Calvin that yourself. So this is what? Breaking and entering? Trespassing?" "Neither. I was invited by the property management company for a title verification walkthrough. Perfectly legal. Would you like to see the authorization?" Marilyn gestured toward the living room. "Please sit. We have things to discuss." "We have nothing to discuss," Tessa said, but she followed Calvin into the living room anyway. Her heels clicking against the hardwood floors Marilyn had refinished herself 15 years ago. "Marcus said this was about title issues with the sale, so let's handle whatever paperwork problem you've created and be done with this." "Marcus Okoye is my attorney," Marilyn said, watching that information land like a small explosion. "He's also one of the top real estate lawyers in Chicago. He represents my interests, not yours." Calvin lowered himself slowly onto the couch, the leather one he and Tessa had bought to replace Marilyn's comfortable fabric sofa. "Your attorney? Marilyn, you can't afford an attorney. You're living in a shelter." "Am I?" Marilyn remained standing, her thrift store coat still on, her canvas bag clutched in both hands. "Tell me, Calvin, what exactly do you think I did for 40 years? Before I raised you, what was my life?" "You were a janitor," he said automatically. "You worked for building management companies. You told me that." "I did tell you that. And it was true." Marilyn set her bag on the coffee table between them, the sound of it hitting wood unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "But it wasn't the complete truth. It was the version I thought you needed to hear. That your mother was humble, hardworking, simple. I thought that would teach you the right values." "What the hell are you talking about?" Tessa leaned forward, her perfectly maintained composure beginning to crack at the edges. "Is this some kind of breakdown? Are you having a psychotic episode?" "I'm having clarity," Marilyn said. "Probably for the first time in 47 years. She pulled out her phone, the ancient flip phone from the drugstore, and set it on the table. "But before we go any further, I think you should hear something, a reminder of how we got here." She pressed play. Calvin's voice filled the room, cold and corporate and undeniable. "I need you to be out by the end of the month. Look, this isn't personal. Tessa and I have been discussing our financial future, and this property represents a significant asset." Tessa's voice sharp as broken glass. "You couldn't have biological children, so you went to an agency and picked out a kid like he was a rescue dog. You got your maternal satisfaction. He got a roof and some meals. But biology is biology, Marilyn. You're not his real mother. You're just the woman who raised him." Silence on the recording. Then Calvin again. "We'll give you 6 weeks instead of 4. That's fair. More than fair, actually." Marilyn pressed stop. The living room existed in a vacuum of sound. Even the street noise outside seemed to have paused, waiting to see what happened next. Calvin's face had gone the color of old newspaper. Tessa's mouth opened and closed without producing words, her influencer-perfect composure completely shattered. "That's illegal recording," Tessa finally managed. "Illinois is a 2-party consent state. You can't—" "I'm not planning to use it in court," Marilyn said quietly. "I'm using it here, now, so that when you try to rewrite history, when you try to tell yourselves that it wasn't that bad, that I'm exaggerating, that I'm being dramatic, you can hear your own voices, your own words, your own choices." "Marilyn," Calvin said, and for the first time his voice carried something that might have been shame if it wasn't buried under defensiveness. "You're taking that out of context. We were under stress. The sale was time-sensitive. I didn't mean—" "You filmed me," Marilyn interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an undertone of something vast and cold. You stood on the porch with your phone and recorded me walking to the street with one suitcase. You made my humiliation into content. What context makes that acceptable? I didn't post it anywhere, Calvin said weakly. Oh, well then, Marilyn said with devastating softness. That makes it fine. Tessa stood abruptly, her body language shifting into attack mode. Okay, this is insane. You show up here with some recording, acting like you're the victim, when you've been guilting Calvin for years, playing the martyr, making him feel obligated to a woman who isn't even his real family. There it is again, Marilyn said. Real family. Tell me, Tessa, what makes family real? DNA? Because Calvin and I don't share that. We never did. I knew that when I signed the adoption papers. I knew it when I sat up with him through nightmares about the foster home where the older kids stole his food. I knew it when I worked double shifts to pay for his college because he deserved better than student loans. DNA didn't make me his mother. Choice did. Every single day for 47 years, I chose him. And he's allowed to make different choices now, Tessa shot back. He's an adult. He has a wife, a career, a future. He doesn't owe you eternal gratitude just because you did the bare minimum of raising a child you chose to adopt. The bare minimum, Marilyn repeated, tasting the words like poison. Yes, that's what it was. The bare minimum. She looked at Calvin, really looked at him, searching for any trace of the boy who'd cried in her arms when his father died, who'd told her she was the best mom in the world when he graduated high school, who'd promised he'd always take care of her when she got old. That boy was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed. Maybe she'd been loving a version of him she'd invented, projecting goodness onto a blank screen that just reflected back whatever she needed to see. I have something to show you, Marilyn said. She pulled out the burner smartphone Marcus had given her and pulled up the portfolio summary. Then she turned the screen toward them. Calvin squinted at it. What is this? My net worth, Marilyn said. As of this morning. The number sat there on the screen, impossible to misread. 127,847,362. Tessa laughed, a sharp, disbelieving bark of sound. That's photoshopped, or a joke, or you're literally insane. It's accurate, Marilyn said. Verified by Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious wealth management firms in Chicago. James Whitmore has been managing my investments for 38 years. Sarah Chen handles my portfolio. Marcus Okoye, who you thought was just a property lawyer, manages my real estate holdings. Patricia Hammond does my tax planning. Calvin was staring at the phone like it was a bomb that might explode if he looked away. This is impossible. You're a janitor. You lived in this house. You drove a 15-year-old Honda. You clipped coupons. I was a janitor, Marilyn confirmed. I did live modestly, and yes, I clipped coupons, because I learned early that people see what they expect to see. You expected a simple woman doing simple work, so that's what I showed you. But while I was pushing that vacuum and scrubbing those toilets, I was also listening, learning, watching how business worked from the inside out. She walked to the window, looking out at the maple tree that had been a sapling when she'd bought this house in 1978. I started in 1982. Cleaning offices downtown, working nights. I'd hear executives talking in the break rooms I cleaned, read the documents left on desks, see which companies were expanding, which ones were struggling, and I started investing, small amounts at first, $100 here, $50 there. But I was patient. I reinvested every dividend, bought real estate when nobody wanted it, sold when the market peaked. You're saying you built a $100 million fortune cleaning toilets, Tessa said flatly. That's absurd. No, I built it listening while I cleaned toilets, Marilyn corrected. There's a difference. Janitors are invisible. We move through spaces where powerful people make decisions, and they forget we have ears and brains. They discuss mergers in boardrooms I'm vacuuming. They leave acquisition plans on desks I'm dusting. They talk about stock tips while I empty their trash. For 40 years, I collected information the way other people collect recipes, and I used it. Calvin's breathing had changed, coming faster and shallower. Why didn't you tell me? If you had this kind of money, why did we struggle? Why did you work yourself to exhaustion? Why did you live like what? Like a normal person? Marilyn turned to face him. Because I wanted you to understand the value of work, the dignity of earning things. I watched too many wealthy people raise entitled children who believed the world owed them success. I didn't want that for you, so I lived modestly. I worked hard. I taught you that money doesn't define worth. But you lied, Calvin said, and now his voice carried anger beneath the shock. You let me think you were poor, struggling. You let me worry about you. Did you worry? Marilyn asked quietly. Did you call on holidays? Visit more than twice a year? Ask how I was managing? Or did you just accept the story I was telling because it was convenient? Because it meant you didn't have to think about me too much? The silence that followed was damning. Tessa recovered her composure first, her influencer training kicking in. When caught off guard, go on offense. So what is this, revenge? You let Calvin evict you, let yourself go homeless, all to teach him some kind of twisted lesson? That's manipulative. That's abuse. I didn't let him do anything, Marilyn said, her voice hardening. I had no warning, no conversation, just an eviction notice and 6 weeks to disappear. You think I chose to sleep in a shelter? To stand in line for free lunch? To crawl on a grocery store floor picking up pennies while strangers laughed? I didn't engineer that humiliation, Tessa. You did. Both of you. We gave you 6 weeks, Calvin said, but the defensiveness in his voice was crumbling, replaced by something rawer. We were generous. You filmed me leaving my home with 1 suitcase, Marilyn said, each word precise as a scalpel. You turned my suffering into spectacle. You stood there with your phone while neighbors watched, and you documented my shame. What part of that was generous, Calvin? He had no answer. Marilyn walked back to the coffee table and pulled out a leather portfolio from her canvas bag, the one James had given her yesterday. She placed it on the table with deliberate care. This is a complete accounting of my assets, real estate holdings, investment portfolio, liquid accounts, business interests, everything I've built over 40 years of being invisible. Calvin reached for it with shaking hands. 6 commercial buildings in Chicago, Marilyn said as he opened the folder. 3 residential complexes. 1 parking structure that generates $90,000 a month in passive income. Tech stocks. Municipal bonds. Venture capital investments in 17 companies, 3 of which went public in the last 5 years. Tessa leaned over Calvin's shoulder, her eyes scanning the documents with the focus of someone watching her entire worldview collapse in real time. This can't be real. This has to be fraud, identity theft, some kind of scam. Call James Whitmore if you don't believe me, Marilyn said, handing her a business card. His direct line. Tell him Marilyn Rowe's son would like verification. He'll confirm every number. Calvin's face had gone from newspaper gray to something worse, the bloodless white of someone in shock. His hands trembled as he turned pages, seeing property after property, account after account, investment after investment. You own the building where I work, he said hoarsely. Riverside Tower, you own 6% of it. I do, Marilyn confirmed. I bought in during the 2009 recession when the previous owners were desperate. Best return on investment I've ever made. The management company handles day-to-day operations. They have no idea who the actual stakeholders are, just numbers on a spreadsheet. So you've been watching me, Calvin said, and now anger was bleeding into his voice. Spying on me. I've been aware of your career, yes, but I didn't interfere, didn't pull strings, didn't use my position to help or hurt you. You earned your job on your own merit. Marilyn paused. Such as it is. The dig landed. Calvin flinched. Tessa slammed the portfolio shut. Okay, great. You're rich. You've been secretly rich this whole time. Congratulations on your weird power play. Now what? You want an apology? You want Calvin to grovel? What's the end game here? The end game, Marilyn said quietly, is truth. For 47 years I hid who I was because I thought it would make me a better mother. I thought if Calvin believed I was simple, humble, powerless, he'd value character over wealth. I was wrong. All I did was teach him that powerless people are disposable. That's not fair, Calvin said, but his voice cracked on the words. Isn't it? You threw me away the moment you thought I had nothing to offer. The moment Tessa convinced you that I was just the woman who raised you, not real family, you evicted me. You filmed it. You changed the locks and told me not to come back. So tell me, Calvin, what would you have done differently if you'd known I had money? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Calvin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know. Yes, you do, Marilyn said. You would have treated me with respect. You would have valued my opinion. You would have included me in your life because I represented access to capital, connections, influence. You would have loved me for what I could give you, not for who I am. That's not true, Calvin said, but the words had no conviction behind them. Then prove it, Marilyn challenged. Tell me right now, if I were still just a janitor with nothing, would you still want me in your life? Would you still call me mom? Would you still care if I was sleeping in a shelter? The silence stretched and stretched and stretched. Finally, Tessa stood, her face hard with calculation. This is emotional manipulation. You're using money to control him, to make him feel guilty for making adult decisions about his own life. You're no different than any other toxic parent who uses financial leverage to maintain power. You're right, Marilyn said, and the agreement seemed to startle Tessa more than an argument would have. I am using money, because money is the only language you both understand. Love didn't matter. Loyalty didn't matter. 47 years of motherhood didn't matter. But money? Money gets your attention. She pulled out another document from her bag. This one sealed with legal stamps and official-looking ribbons. This is my will, updated as of this morning. Patricia Hammond, my attorney, has the original. This is a copy for your records. Calvin took it like it might bite him. Marilyn, you don't have to open it. He opened it. The relevant section was highlighted in yellow. All assets, holdings, investments, and property rights of Marilyn Rose Rowe are hereby bequeathed to the Rowe Foundation for Elder Dignity, a registered 501c3 charitable organization. No individual inheritors are named. This supersedes all previous versions of this document. You're disinheriting me, Calvin said dully. I'm redirecting my legacy toward people who need it more than you do, Marilyn corrected. Elderly people abandoned by their families. Women made homeless by children who decided they were inconvenient. People society has decided are finished, disposable, invisible. The foundation will provide emergency housing, legal advocacy, and financial literacy programs. Everything I built will go toward making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. This is insane, Tessa said, but her voice had lost its edge, replaced by something that sounded like panic. Calvin, she's punishing you because her feelings got hurt. This is exactly the kind of manipulative... My feelings? Marilyn turned to her with eyes like winter ice. You think this is about hurt feelings? Tessa, you told me I wasn't real family. You called me a rescue dog. You laughed while I packed my life into a suitcase. You stood in this kitchen and turned my son against me because you saw dollar signs where I saw legacy. And now you're angry because the dollar signs belong to me, not him. We deserve that money, Tessa said, the mask fully off now. Calvin is your son. He took care of you. He gave you a home. He gave me a home? Marilyn's voice rose for the first time, 47 years of controlled composure finally cracking. I bought this house in 1978. I paid the mortgage for 30 years. I raised him in these rooms. I signed it over to him 3 years ago because he convinced me it was for my protection, and the moment it was legally his, he decided I was disposable. The force of her emotion seemed to physically push Tessa back a step. Marilyn took a breath, centering herself, finding that cold, quiet place where power lived. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. But you're right about one thing. Calvin is my son, which is why I'm giving him a choice. Calvin looked up from the will, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. What choice? Marilyn walked to the fireplace mantel and picked up one of the expensive abstract pieces that had replaced his childhood photos. She turned it over in her hands, studying it like an artifact from an alien civilization. I'm going to hold a press conference next week at Millennium Park. I'm going to tell my story, all of it. The adoption, the eviction, the shelter, the empire I built in secret, everything. You can't, Tessa breathed. That's private. That's our lives. It's my life, Marilyn corrected, and I'm done hiding it. The foundation needs an origin story. People need to understand why it exists. So I'm going to stand in front of cameras and microphones and tell the truth about what happened when a son decided his adoptive mother was worth less than quarterly profits. That will destroy Calvin's career, Tessa said. Everyone will know, his colleagues, his clients, everyone. Yes, Marilyn said simply. They will, unless... Unless what? Calvin asked hoarsely. Unless you apologize, publicly, at the same press conference, in front of everyone. Marilyn set the abstract piece back on the mantel. You stand beside me. You take full responsibility for what you did, and you explain to the world exactly why you evicted your 70-year-old mother and filmed her leaving with one suitcase. You own it, completely. No excuses, no justifications, no blame shifting. And if I do that, you won't disinherit me? Calvin asked. Marilyn smiled sadly. No, Calvin, the will doesn't change regardless. The foundation gets the money. That's already decided. But if you apologize, if you do the hard, humiliating work of public accountability, I'll consider letting you back into my life. Not as my heir, as my son. If that still means anything to you. The air went out of Calvin like a punctured balloon. He slumped back on the couch, the will still clutched in his hands, looking smaller than Marilyn had ever seen him. Tessa moved toward the door. This is extortion. This is abuse. Calvin, we should call our lawyer. And tell them what? Marilyn asked. That I'm giving my money to charity instead of leaving it to the son who made me homeless? That I'm requiring a public apology for actions he's already documented on his own phone? Go ahead. Call. See what they say. Tessa's hand was on the doorknob when Calvin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. How long do I have to decide? The press conference is scheduled for next Tuesday at 2 p.m., Marilyn said. Whether you're there or not is your choice, but I'll be there either way, with or without you, telling the truth with or without your participation. And if I don't come? If I refuse? Then you'll read about it online like everyone else, Marilyn said. And the next time we see each other, if we see each other, it will be as strangers who happen to share legal paperwork from 47 years ago. She walked to the front door and opened it. Outside, James Whitmore's Mercedes sat 3 houses down, discreet and waiting. I think we're done here. This is still technically your house until the legal complications are resolved. I have no interest in staying where I'm not wanted. Calvin stood slowly, mechanically, like a man learning to walk after a stroke. Marilyn, Mom, Don't, she said quietly. Not now. Not here. If you have something to say it on Tuesday with the world watching. Otherwise, your words don't mean anything anymore. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Tessa's sharp, angry whisper. You're not seriously considering this? And Calvin's response, broken and small. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Marilyn walked down the path to where James waited, her thrift store coat flapping in the October wind, her canvas bag clutched against her chest like armor. She didn't look back. James didn't ask questions during the drive. He simply pulled away from the curb as Marilyn settled into the passenger seat, her hand steady on her canvas bag, even though everything inside her was trembling with the aftershock of 47 years of silence finally breaking open. The peninsula, he said quietly, making it a statement rather than a question. Marilyn looked at him. What? The hotel. I took the liberty of booking you a suite when you texted that the meeting was finished. You're not going back to that shelter. His tone was gentle but absolute. Not tonight. Not ever again. James, Marilyn, you just confronted your son with $127 million in assets while wearing a thrift store coat you bought for $8. You've made your point. The performance is over. Let yourself have comfort. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she needed to maintain the imagery, keep the evidence of her suffering visible and undeniable. But the truth was she was exhausted down to her bones, not from the confrontation, but from 6 weeks of pretending that sleeping on a shelter mat and eating donated food hadn't been slowly killing something essential inside her. All right, she said quietly. The peninsula. They drove in silence through Chicago's afternoon traffic. Marilyn watched the city transform outside her window from residential streets to commercial districts to the gleaming luxury of Michigan Avenue, where money lived in plain sight instead of hiding in ledgers and offshore accounts. The peninsula Chicago rose against the October sky like a monument to the kind of wealth that didn't apologize for existing. Doormen in pristine uniforms, marble lobbies, the hushed reverence of a place where suffering was something that happened to other people, somewhere else, in neighborhoods the guests would never visit. James handed his keys to the valet and came around to open Marilyn's door. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, acutely aware of how she looked. 70 years old in worn clothes with a canvas bag that had Grace Cathedral Shelter printed on the side in faded letters. The doorman didn't blink. He simply smiled and said, "Welcome to the peninsula, ma'am." Inside, James steered her toward the elevators while talking quietly with someone from the front desk who materialized beside them with the smooth efficiency of expensive hospitality. "Mrs. Rowe's suite is ready. Her luggage will be brought up shortly." "I don't have luggage," Marilyn said. "You will," James replied. "Sarah and Patricia are handling it. They'll have everything you need delivered within the hour." The elevator doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like money, fresh flowers, expensive carpet, the particular silence that comes from walls thick enough to contain other people's problems. James led her to a door at the end, opened it with a key card, and gestured her inside. Marilyn stepped into luxury that felt like a physical force. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, a living room larger than her entire shelter dormitory, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, everything cream and gold and perfect. "The bedroom is through there," James said, pointing. "Bathroom has a soaking tub that's probably big enough to swim in. Minibar is stocked, but I'll have them send up a proper meal. When was the last time you ate something that wasn't institutional?" "This morning," Marilyn said, still standing in the doorway like a visitor in her own life. "Toast, coffee, from the shelter." "Then you're overdue." James pulled out his phone and made a call, ordering what sounded like half the menu. When he finished, he turned back to Marilyn with an expression that was part concern, part pride. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm not sure who I am anymore," Marilyn said honestly. "For 6 weeks, I've been the woman sleeping in a shelter. Before that, I was the invisible janitor. Before that, I was the simple mother who clipped coupons. I've been hiding for so long I'm not sure I remember how to be visible." "You were visible today," James said. "Spectacularly so. The look on Calvin's face when you showed him that portfolio summary. I wish I'd photographed it. Pure cognitive dissonance." "Do you think he'll come? On Tuesday?" James considered the question with the careful deliberation of someone who'd spent 40 years reading people for a living. "Honestly, I don't know. He's weak, but not necessarily evil. Tessa's influence is significant, and she'll fight tooth and nail to prevent any public accountability. But you created an impossible situation for him. Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. If he shows up and apologizes, he admits everything publicly. If he doesn't show up, you tell the story without him, and he looks even worse." "That was the point," Marilyn said. "No easy exits. No comfortable compromise. Just truth or consequences." A knock at the door interrupted them. James opened it to reveal Patricia and Sarah, both carrying shopping bags with logos from stores Marilyn recognized but had never entered. "Emergency wardrobe intervention," Sarah announced, sweeping into the suite with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems with strategic spending. "We hit Neiman Marcus, Saks, and Nordstrom. Business casual, evening wear, comfortable loungewear, and absolutely everything in between. We guessed your size based on what you were wearing at the meeting." Patricia set her bags down more carefully. "Also toiletries, makeup, accessories, and sleepwear. Everything you need to stop living like a refugee from your own life." Marilyn looked at the bags, easily $10,000 worth of clothing and accessories, and felt something break loose in her chest. Not tears exactly. Something bigger than tears. A kind of grief for the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, and the woman she'd been before that, and all the versions of herself she'd buried under practicality and self-effacement, and the belief that making herself small would somehow make her son value her more. "Thank you," she managed. "This is too much, but thank you." "It's literally nothing compared to what you're worth," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "And frankly, if you're going to face down the Chicago media next Tuesday, you need armor, good armor. The kind that says, 'I'm not a victim, I'm a billionaire who chose to be underestimated.'" "100 millionaire," Marilyn corrected automatically. Give it 6 months, Sarah said with a grin. The way your tech stocks are performing, you'll cross into 10 figures by summer. Another knock. Room service arrived with enough food for 6 people. Roasted chicken, fresh salads, pasta, bread that actually looked like bread instead of compressed sadness, fruit that wasn't bruised, desserts that belonged in art galleries. The server arranged everything on the dining table with the precise choreography of hospitality theater, then departed with a murmured hope that everything would be satisfactory. Marilyn stared at the spread. I can't possibly eat all this. You don't have to, James said, but you should eat something real. When's the last time you had a meal that wasn't designed to feed maximum people with minimum cost? She couldn't remember. Everything at the shelter had been institutional, edible, nutritious enough to prevent lawsuits, but devoid of anything resembling pleasure or care. Patricia pulled out a chair. Sit, eat. Let us handle the logistics while you remember what it feels like to be taken care of instead of taking care of everyone else. Marilyn sat. She put food on her plate. Chicken that smelled like rosemary and garlic, salad with actual vinaigrette, bread still warm from wherever magnificent bread came from. The first bite of chicken nearly made her cry. Not because it was particularly extraordinary, but because it tasted like dignity, like choice, like someone had considered whether she might enjoy her food instead of just survive it. While she ate, the 3 of them worked around her with efficient coordination. James made calls about the press conference, venue confirmed, media invitations sent, security arranged. Sarah reviewed portfolio adjustments on her tablet, making notes about quarterly rebalancing and tax optimization. Patricia drafted foundation activation documents, muttering to herself about charitable tax deductions and board appointments. They were giving her space to process by staying busy, Marilyn realized, letting her sit with her thoughts without forcing conversation or demanding emotional labor. She finished eating and moved to the windows, looking out at Lake Michigan where boats cut white paths through dark water and the city stretched toward the horizon in every direction. Somewhere out there, Calvin was sitting in the house that used to be hers, trying to reconcile the mother he'd thrown away with the stranger who owned buildings and commanded attorneys and held his entire future in her weathered hands. What do you think he's doing right now? Marilyn asked without turning around. The room went quiet. Then Sarah spoke carefully. Probably fighting with Tessa about whether to show up Tuesday. She'll tell him not to, Patricia added. She'll frame it as you manipulating him, controlling him through guilt and money. She'll paint you as the villain. And Calvin? Marilyn asked. What will he do? James joined her at the window, standing close enough for solidarity, but far enough for respect. That depends on what he values more, his pride or his conscience. Tessa will offer him an easy narrative. You're unstable, vindictive, unreliable. You've fabricated this wealth somehow, or you're exaggerating it, or even if it's real, you had no right to hide it. She'll give him permission to be angry instead of ashamed. And if his conscience wins, then he shows up on Tuesday and does the hardest thing he's ever done, James said quietly. He stands in front of strangers and admits that he failed you in the most fundamental way possible, that he valued convenience over loyalty, that he let someone else define your worth, that he forgot everything you taught him about character and kindness and treating people with dignity. Do you think he's capable of that? James was quiet for a long moment. I think most people are capable of more than they believe, both good and terrible. Calvin chose terrible when it was easy. Whether he can choose good when it's hard, that's the question you forced him to answer. Marilyn's phone buzzed. The flip phone, not the smartphone. She pulled it out, expecting maybe a wrong number, or a spam call. It was a text from Calvin. Can we talk? Just us. No lawyers. No Tessa. Please. She showed it to James. Your call, he said. But if you meet with him, do it on your terms, your location, your timeline. Marilyn looked at the message for a long moment, feeling the weight of 47 years pressing against 6 weeks of clarity. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. The mother part. The part that had nursed him through fevers and celebrated his victories and loved him with the kind of ferocious, unconditional devotion that adoption required because it was chosen, not biological. But another part. The part that had counted pennies on a grocery store floor. The part that had slept in a shelter while he slept in her house. The part that had heard Tessa call her not real family, while Calvin remained silent, That part knew better. She typed Tuesday, 2 p.m., Millennium Park. Everything else you need to say, you can say publicly. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. His response came 30 seconds later. I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know. Marilyn stared at those words. I'm sorry. 2 words that cost nothing and changed nothing, offered in the privacy of a text message where no one could see or judge or hold him accountable. She typed back, words are cheap, Calvin. I need to see what your sorry looks like when it's expensive. No response. She put the phone away. All right, Patricia said, closing her laptop with decisive finality. Foundation business. The paperwork is ready to file, but we need to make some strategic decisions before Tuesday. Board composition, initial grant priorities, public messaging. This is going to be a high-profile launch given the circumstances, so we need to control the narrative carefully. They moved to the dining table, spreading documents across the surface like battle plans. Because that's what they were, Marilyn realized. Not revenge exactly, but a strategic deployment of resources toward a specific outcome, making sure her suffering produced something meaningful instead of just fading into the background noise of elder abuse that happened every day in every city to women nobody noticed. Board of Directors, Patricia said, pulling out a legal pad, we need 5 minimum for nonprofit status. I'd recommend keeping it small and powerful initially, people with credibility in elder advocacy, housing policy, and financial literacy. What about including someone who's experienced homelessness? Marilyn asked. Someone who understands the system from the inside, not just from philanthropic distance? Sarah nodded approvingly. That's brilliant. Gives you ground-level perspective and lived experience. Do you have someone in mind? Marilyn thought of Denise, the intake coordinator at Grace Cathedral Shelter, who'd seen 1,000 women in crisis and helped as many as the broken system allowed. I might. Let me make a call. She pulled out the flip phone and dialed the shelter's main number. 3 transfers and 5 minutes of hold music later, Denise's tired voice came on the line. Grace Cathedral, intake. This is Denise. Denise, it's Marilyn. Marilyn Rowe. I stayed there for 6 weeks. A pause. Marilyn? Are you okay? Did you find housing? I did. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Do you have a minute to talk privately? Hold on. Sounds of movement, a door closing, street noise in the background. Okay, I'm outside. What's going on? Marilyn took a breath. I'm starting a foundation. $50 million dedicated to elder housing, financial abuse advocacy, and support services. I need people on the board who actually understand what it's like to work in the system, to see the failures up close. Would you consider it? Dead silence on the other end. Then, is this a prank? Because if this is some kind of scam, it's not. I promise. My attorneys can send you verification, incorporation documents, everything. The foundation is real. The money is real. And I want people who've been in the trenches, not just people who write checks from a distance. More silence. Then Denise's voice, very quiet. You were seriously rich this whole time? Living in our shelter? It's complicated, Marilyn said. But yes, and I learned more in 6 weeks about how the system fails people than I learned in 40 years of writing donation checks. I need that knowledge on the board. I need your knowledge. Why me? Because you told me to remember where I started when I built something better. Because you see people, really see them, when everyone else is looking through them. Because you know exactly where the money needs to go. Denise laughed, a sound somewhere between disbelief and hope. How much does this board position pay? $50,000 a year, Patricia interjected, loud enough to be heard through the phone. Plus expenses for meetings and site visits. Jesus Christ, Denise muttered. That's more than I make running the entire shelter. Then say yes, Marilyn said. Help me build something that actually works. When do you need an answer? Take 48 hours. Think about it. My attorney will send you the details. Marilyn gave her Patricia's contact information. And Denise? Thank you. For everything you did for me when I had nothing. You treated me like I mattered. You did matter, Denise said simply. You all do. That's the whole problem. The system treats people like numbers instead of human beings. If you're serious about fixing that, then yeah, I'm interested. They hung up. Marilyn looked at her assembled team, 3 of Chicago's finest professional minds, sitting in a luxury hotel suite, planning a foundation that wouldn't exist if her son hadn't decided she was disposable. Next item, Sarah said. Grant priorities. What populations do you want to focus on first? Marilyn thought about the women she'd met at the shelter. Women in their 60s and 70s who'd worked their whole lives only to be abandoned by children, partners, systems. Women who'd raised families and built careers and contributed everything they had, only to end up sleeping on mats because someone decided they'd outlived their usefulness. Elderly women displaced by family abandonment, she said. That's first priority. Emergency housing vouchers, legal support for financial abuse cases, and bridge funding to help them reestablish independence. I want a fast response system. When someone ends up homeless because their kid evicted them, they get immediate help. No 6-week waiting period, no bureaucratic maze, just rapid deployment of resources. Patricia was writing furiously. That's going to require partnerships with housing agencies, legal aid organizations, and probably some kind of 24-hour hotline for crisis intervention. Then we build it, Marilyn said, whatever it takes. They worked through the evening, building systems and strategies and solutions. By the time James called it quits at 9 p.m., they had a framework for something that could actually change lives, instead of just making donors feel good about themselves. After they left, Marilyn stood in the shower longer than necessary, letting water hot enough to wash away 6 weeks of institutional soap and shelter grime. She used the expensive shampoo that smelled like lavender and something else refined and lovely. She dried off with towels thick enough to use as blankets. Then she put on the silk pajamas Sarah had bought, the first new sleepwear she'd owned in 5 years, and climbed into a bed with sheets that felt like clouds made of money. She should have fallen asleep immediately, should have collapsed into unconsciousness the way people do after extended crisis finally resolves. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Calvin, about the boy who'd been 3 years old when she'd met him at the adoption agency, small and scared and heartbreakingly hopeful when the social worker said, "This is Marilyn. She might be your new mama." About the teenager who'd sobbed in her arms when his father died, asking, "Why do people I love always leave?" About the college graduate who'd promised at his commencement party, surrounded by friends Marilyn had fed and housed throughout his adolescence, "I'll always take care of you, Mom. You took care of me. Now it's my turn." That boy had existed. She knew he had. She'd watched him grow, shape himself, become someone she'd been proud of. But somewhere between that promise and the eviction notice, he'd become someone else. Or maybe he'd always been this person, and she'd just loved him too much to see it clearly. Her phone buzzed. The smartphone this time. A text from Marcus. "Property ownership records finalized. The house on Maple Street is legally yours again. Transfer was fraudulent, signed under duress and false pretenses. Calvin has been notified he has 30 days to vacate. Locks will be changed tomorrow morning. Your house. Your rules." Marilyn read the message 3 times. She could move back in tomorrow, reclaim every room, every memory, every piece of the life she'd built before Calvin had decided she was disposable. But the thought of living there again, of sleeping in rooms where Tessa had called her not real family, of walking through spaces where Calvin had served her an eviction notice, made her feel tired in ways sleep couldn't fix. She typed back, "Sell it, donate proceeds to the foundation. I don't want it anymore." Marcus responded immediately, "Understood. I'll handle it." Just like that, she was done with the house, done with the physical space where she'd tried so hard to be enough for a son who'd measured her worth in the wrong currency. Tomorrow was Saturday. 3 days until Tuesday. 3 days until Calvin would either show up and take accountability or prove definitively that the boy she'd raised had been replaced entirely by the man Tessa had cultivated. Marilyn finally drifted into sleep around midnight and dreamed of counting pennies on an infinite floor while strangers watched and Calvin filmed it all, his phone held steady, his expression blank, his silence louder than any words. She woke Sunday morning to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close and room service breakfast she didn't remember ordering. A note on the tray in James's handwriting. "Eat, rest, prepare." Tuesday changes everything, She ate fresh fruit and perfectly cooked eggs and coffee that tasted like it cost more per cup than she'd spent on food in an entire shelter week. Then she dressed in one of the outfits Sarah had bought, simple, elegant, expensive in ways that didn't scream but whispered with confidence. She spent the day walking, not aimlessly, but with purpose, through Millennium Park where the press conference would happen, around the shelter where she'd slept for 6 weeks, past the grocery store where she'd counted pennies, through every space where she'd been invisible, practicing being visible. People still didn't see her, mostly. 70-year-old women in good clothes were perhaps less invisible than 70-year-old women in thrift store coats, but not by much. Society had decided she was finished, and society's attention span was too short to notice when finished women decided to rewrite their endings. Monday morning, James called. Media RSVPs are through the roof. Every major Chicago outlet confirmed, plus national coverage. This is going to be big, Marilyn. Good, she said. Let it be big. And Calvin? No word. 24 hours left for him to decide. I know. Monday afternoon, Patricia sent the final foundation documents for her signature. Marilyn signed them in the hotel business center, her hand steady, her intention absolute. The Roe Foundation for Elder Dignity was now official, funded, operational. $50 million deployed toward making sure her suffering counted for something. Monday evening, Sarah called. Your portfolio hit a new milestone today. You're officially worth $132 million. Congratulations. It doesn't feel real, Marilyn admitted. It's real, Sarah said, and tomorrow everyone will know it. Monday night, Marilyn stood at the window of her hotel suite, watching Chicago light up against the darkness. Somewhere out there, Calvin was making his choice. Coming or not coming. Speaking or staying silent. Choosing accountability or comfort. She realized with strange clarity that she didn't know which outcome she preferred. If he came, she'd have to forgive him. Not immediately, not completely, but eventually. She'd have to make space for the possibility that people could fail catastrophically and still be worth redemption. If he didn't come, she could be finished with him cleanly. No ambiguity, no hoping he'd become someone better. Just clarity and distance and the freedom to build her legacy without the weight of his choices. Her phone rang. Not a text this time. An actual call. Calvin. She stared at his name on the screen for 4 rings before answering. Hello. Mom. His voice was wrecked, raw, like he'd been crying or screaming or both. I'm coming tomorrow. I'm going to be there. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. Marilyn's hand tightened on the phone. Why? Because you're right. About everything. I threw you away because Tessa made it easy to believe you weren't worth the inconvenience. Because I wanted the house and the money more than I wanted to be someone you could be proud of. Because I forgot that you chose me when nobody else wanted me, and I repaid that by deciding you didn't matter. And Tessa? A long pause. Gone. She left this morning when I told her I was apologizing, said I was weak, said you were manipulating me, said if I do this, we're done. And you chose the apology anyway. I chose you, Calvin said, his voice breaking. 47 years too late, but I'm choosing you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything except the chance to tell the truth about who I became and who I should have been all along. Marilyn closed her eyes. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Be on time. I will. I promise. Mom? Yes? I love you. I know I have no right to say that anymore, but it's true. It's always been true. I just let it get buried under everything else. She wanted to say it back, wanted to tell him she loved him too, that she'd never stopped, that love was the whole problem. She'd loved him so much she'd made herself small, thinking it would keep him close. Instead, she said, "See you tomorrow, Calvin," and hung up. Tuesday morning arrived with autumn sunshine and cold wind. Marilyn dressed with care in a navy suit that looked nothing like her thrift store coat, but somehow felt like armor of a different kind. She did her own makeup, simple, dignified, the face of someone who'd survived and wouldn't apologize for it. At 1 p.m., James picked her up. Ready? No, Marilyn said honestly, but let's go anyway. They drove to Millennium Park where media vans already clustered like metal birds of prey, cameras and microphones and reporters who'd smelled a story worth covering. Sarah and Patricia were already there, coordinating with the event team, making sure everything was perfect. At 1:47, Marilyn took her position at the podium. At 1:53, she saw Calvin arrive. Alone. In a suit that looked like he'd slept in it. His face devastated but determined. Their eyes met across the gathering crowd. He nodded once. She nodded back. At 2 p.m. exactly, Marilyn Rose stepped up to the microphones and began to speak. The microphone stood before her like a small forest of black metal and foam windscreens, each one representing a different outlet hungry for the story of the 70-year-old woman who'd apparently materialized a fortune from thin air. Marilyn could see her reflection in the camera lenses, magnified, distorted, but undeniably present in a way she hadn't been for 6 weeks. She adjusted the microphone stand with steady hands and looked out at the assembled crowd. Reporters with notebooks and recording devices. Photographers jockeying for position. Camera operators from every major Chicago station and several national networks. And scattered throughout, curious onlookers who'd stopped their Tuesday afternoon walks through Millennium Park because something interesting was happening and phones could capture anything. Calvin stood at the edge of the media cluster, close enough to hear but far enough to not intrude. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed behind glasses he usually only wore at home. He looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, as if the decision to show up had cost him inches of height. James stood to Marilyn's left, James Whitmore himself lending his considerable professional gravity to the proceedings. Sarah and Patricia flanked the edges of the podium area, ready to provide supporting documentation if needed. They'd built a fortress of credibility around her, making sure that when she spoke, the world would have no choice but to listen. Marilyn cleared her throat, the crowd noise diminished to expectant silence. "My name is Marilyn Rose Rowe," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the space without shouting. "I'm 70 years old. 6 weeks ago, I became homeless. Today, I'm worth $132 million. Those two facts are both true, and understanding how they can coexist requires me to tell you a story I've kept hidden for 47 years. She paused, letting that sink in. Camera shutters clicked like mechanical insects. Someone in the back coughed. In 1978, I was a young woman who couldn't have biological children. I worked as a janitor for a commercial building management company. I made minimum wage, lived in a small apartment, and wanted more than anything to be a mother. So I went to an adoption agency and met a 3-year-old boy named Calvin. He'd been in the foster system for 2 years. He was small, scared, and had learned not to trust adults who made promises. But when the social worker asked if he wanted to try living with me, he looked up and said, "Are you my mama now?" I said yes, and I meant it. Marilyn could see Calvin in her peripheral vision, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly. I adopted him officially 6 months later. I raised him alone after his adoptive father died when Calvin was 12. I worked night shifts cleaning office buildings so I could be home during the day. I clipped coupons and bought secondhand clothes and did everything I could to provide stability and love. But while I was cleaning those buildings, I was also learning, listening, watching how business worked from the perspective nobody notices. She gestured to Sarah, who held up the first display board, a timeline of investments starting in 1982. I started investing small amounts in 1982, $50 here, $100 there. I read every business document left on desks I cleaned. I heard executives discuss mergers in conference rooms while I vacuumed. I learned which companies were expanding and which were dying. And I was patient. I reinvested every dividend. I bought real estate during recessions when nobody else wanted it. I made careful, informed decisions over decades. By the time Calvin graduated college, I was worth $7 million. By the time he got married, I was worth $43 million, and he never knew. A reporter near the front raised her hand. Marilyn ignored it, continuing. I hid my wealth because I wanted Calvin to understand the value of work and character. I wanted him to build his own life on merit, not on expectations of inheritance. I thought if I lived simply, if I showed him that money doesn't define worth, he'd grow up to be someone who valued people over portfolios. I was wrong. She pulled out a sheet of paper, the eviction notice, preserved in a clear plastic sleeve. On September 8th of this year, my son served me an eviction notice. The house I'd bought in 1978, the house where I'd raised him, The house I'd signed over to him 3 years ago because he convinced me it was for estate planning. He ordered me to vacate within 6 weeks. His wife told me, and I quote, "You're not his real mother. You're just the woman who raised him." My son filmed me leaving with one suitcase to make sure the neighbors witnessed my humiliation. The crowd's energy shifted. Marilyn could feel it. The transition from curious to invested, from watching a press conference to witnessing something raw and real. I spent 6 weeks in a shelter on Chicago's South Side. I slept on a mat with 36 other women. I ate institutional food. I stood in line for assistance programs. I applied for jobs and was rejected because I was too old, too worn out, too invisible. And one afternoon, at a grocery store on Madison Street, my assistance card was declined. I had to count coins to pay for bread and peanut butter. When I dropped those coins, I got down on my hands and knees on that dirty floor and picked up pennies one at a time while strangers watched and someone took a photo. She paused, letting the image settle in the minds of everyone listening. I could have ended that suffering at any moment. I could have made one phone call and moved into a luxury hotel. But I didn't, because I needed to understand something. I needed to know if my son had thrown me away because I had nothing to offer, or if he'd have thrown me away regardless. I needed to see the system that abandons elderly people, to feel it from the inside instead of just reading about it in charity proposals. And I needed to know if the boy I'd raised with so much love had become a man who valued dignity or just convenience. Marilyn looked directly at Calvin. He was crying openly now, not trying to hide it, tears streaming down his face in a way that made him look simultaneously broken and somehow more human than she'd seen him in years. "Calvin," she said, her voice softening slightly but still amplified by the microphones. "Come up here." The crowd rippled with anticipation. Calvin hesitated, looking like a man being asked to walk to his own execution. Then he moved forward, climbing the 3 steps to the podium area with movements that suggested each step required conscious effort. He stood beside Marilyn, not touching, the space between them filled with 6 weeks of homelessness and 47 years of complicated love. "Tell them," Marilyn said quietly, stepping back from the microphone. "Tell them what you did and why you did it." Calvin stepped forward. His hands gripped the podium edges like a drowning man clutching a life preserver. When he spoke, his voice cracked on the first word, and he had to start again. "My name is Calvin Vale. I'm 47 years old, and I evicted my mother from her home because my wife convinced me that adoptive parents don't count as real family, and I was too weak to disagree." The words fell into the crowd like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and fascination. "My mother raised me from the time I was 3 years old. She worked night shifts so she could be home during the day. She went without so I could have. She taught me everything I know about character and kindness and treating people with dignity. And when my wife suggested we could make more money if we sold the house my mother lived in, I didn't defend her. I didn't protect her. I didn't even ask where she would go. I just served the paperwork and told myself it was a smart financial decision." Calvin's voice was getting stronger, the words coming faster now like a confession that had been building pressure for weeks. "I filmed her leaving. I stood on the porch with my phone and recorded my 70-year-old mother walking to the street with one suitcase because I thought it would be... I don't even know what I thought. That it would be memorable? That I'd want to remember the moment I chose profit over people? I watched neighbors record it too, turning her suffering into entertainment, and I didn't stop them. I changed the locks the same day. I texted her to make sure she knew not to come back." A reporter tried to interject a question. Calvin held up his hand. "No, let me finish. You need to hear all of it." He took a shaking breath. "When she called me 6 weeks later and told me she was homeless, living in a shelter, I was annoyed, not concerned, not horrified. Annoyed that she was making my life complicated. I told myself she should have prepared better, should have saved money, should have figured something out. I told myself that adults are responsible for their own situations. I believed my wife when she said my mother was manipulating me, trying to make me feel guilty for making an adult decision about my own property." Calvin turned to look at Marilyn, his face destroyed by regret. "I forgot that the property was only mine because you signed it over to protect me. I forgot that you worked double shifts to pay for my college. I forgot that when Dad died, you promised me nothing would change, that you'd make sure I was okay, and you kept that promise even when it cost you everything. I forgot that you chose me when I was a scared little kid nobody else wanted. I forgot all of it because my wife told me you weren't real family, and I let myself believe her because it made it easier to take what I wanted." The silence was absolute now. Even the cameras had stopped clicking. 6 days ago, my mother revealed that she's worth over $100 million. That while she was cleaning buildings, she was building an empire I never knew existed. That she could have lived in luxury but chose to live simply to teach me values I apparently never learned. And when she showed me the proof, I tried to defend myself. I tried to make excuses. I tried to reframe my cruelty as reasonable adult decision-making. Calvin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught every word. "I am ashamed, not because she has money, and I thought she didn't. I'm ashamed because I threw away the person who loved me most in the world the moment it became convenient. I'm ashamed because I became exactly the kind of person she raised me not to be. I'm ashamed because she had to sleep in a shelter and count pennies on a dirty floor before I was willing to see what I'd done." He turned back to the crowd, his face wet with tears he wasn't trying to hide. "My mother asked me to come here today and take accountability publicly. She didn't have to give me that option. She could have just told this story without me and let me read about it online like everyone else. But she gave me a choice: show up and tell the truth, or stay hidden and prove I haven't changed. So here I am, telling you that I failed the person who never failed me, telling you that elder abandonment isn't just something that happens to other families. It happens when good people make selfish choices and convince themselves those choices are justified. It happened because I let it happen." He stepped back from the microphone, looking at Marilyn with an expression of complete surrender. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom. I don't expect anything except the chance to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the sacrifice you made when you chose me." Marilyn stood very still, feeling the weight of 47 years pressing against 6 weeks of clarity, pressing against this single moment where everything could change or everything could end. The crowd waited. The cameras watched. The world held its breath. She stepped forward to the microphone. "Forgiveness," she said slowly, "is not the same as forgetting. I can forgive my son for what he did while still remembering that he did it. I can forgive while still requiring that forgiveness be earned through action, not just words. I can forgive while still making sure the damage he caused gets transformed into something that helps other people." She gestured to Patricia, who held up the foundation documents. "Today I'm announcing the activation of the Roe Foundation for Elder Dignity, $50 million dedicated to supporting elderly people abandoned by their families, emergency housing vouchers, legal advocacy for financial abuse, financial literacy programs, rapid response systems so that when someone ends up homeless because their children decided quarterly profits matter more than gratitude, they get immediate help. Not in 6 weeks. Not after bureaucratic mazes. Immediately." The crowd erupted with questions. Marilyn held up her hand for silence. "The foundation is already operational. We have partnerships being finalized with housing agencies, legal aid organizations, and advocacy groups. We're building a 24-hour crisis hotline. We're creating a model that can be replicated in other cities. And we're doing this because my suffering should count for something beyond just my own story." She looked at Calvin. "My son will be volunteering with the foundation, not on the board, not in a position of power or prestige. He'll be working directly with displaced seniors, hearing their stories, helping them navigate systems, doing the actual hands-on work of supporting people society has decided don't matter anymore. He'll learn what it feels like to be invisible by serving people who've been made invisible." Calvin nodded, his expression suggesting he'd agree to anything, walk through fire if she asked, do penance until his hands bled if that's what it took. "But more than that," Marilyn continued, her voice strengthening, "I want everyone watching this to understand something crucial. The elderly people in your life, your parents, your grandparents, your aging relatives, they are not disposable. They are not burdens. They are not obstacles to your financial optimization. They are human beings who built the world you inherited, and they deserve dignity in their final chapters. Not because they have money hidden away, not because they might leave you an inheritance, but because they are people, and people matter." She pulled out her phone, the drugstore flip phone she'd carried through 6 weeks of shelter life, and held it up. "This is the phone I bought when I had nothing. I'm keeping it. not as a reminder of suffering, but as a reminder of clarity. Because when you have nothing, you see things clearly. You see who shows up and who disappears. You see which values are real and which ones only exist when they're convenient. You see yourself without the comfortable lies we tell to make bad choices feel justified. Marilyn set the phone on the podium. I see my son clearly now, not as the perfect child I wanted him to be, not as the villain who threw me away, but as a flawed human being who made terrible choices and is now doing the hard work of becoming someone better. That's all any of us can do, see ourselves clearly, own what we've done, and choose differently going forward. She turned to Calvin. I forgive you, not because you deserve it yet, but because carrying anger takes energy I'd rather spend building something better. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. It means we move forward with new terms. You will earn your way back into my life through consistent action, not occasional apologies. You will prove through daily choices that you understand what you did and why it was wrong. And if you can do that, if you can become someone I can trust again, then maybe someday we'll rebuild what you destroyed. Calvin nodded, unable to speak, tears still streaming. Marilyn faced the crowd again. Questions? Hands shot up like a forest of urgency. Marilyn pointed to a reporter in the front, a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes and a press badge from the Tribune. Mrs. Rowe, you mentioned you're worth over $100 million. Where exactly did this money come from? Can you provide verification? James stepped forward with a leather portfolio. We have complete documentation, investment records going back to 1982, tax returns, property deeds, all verified by independent auditors. Mrs. Rowe built this wealth through patient, informed investing over 4 decades. It's completely legitimate. Another reporter, this one from a national cable network. Calvin, your wife Tessa, where is she? Is she aware of this press conference? Calvin cleared his throat. Tessa left when I told her I was coming here today. She made it clear that if I took public accountability for my actions, our marriage was over. I chose accountability. Do you regret that choice? Calvin looked at Marilyn, then back at the reporter. I regret everything except this. Being here, telling the truth. That's the first thing I haven't regretted in 6 weeks. A younger reporter, maybe late 20s, raised his phone. Mrs. Rowe, someone photographed you at a grocery store picking up coins. That photo circulated on social media. Did you know you were being documented? I knew, Marilyn said quietly. I saw the phones, heard the laughter. In that moment, I was just another pathetic old woman people could turn into content. But yes, I knew. And I let it happen because I needed to understand what invisibility feels like when you're not choosing it, when it's being forced on you by people who've decided you don't matter. And now that your story is public, what happens to that image? To the narrative people created about you? It gets rewritten, Marilyn said simply. The woman counting pennies wasn't pathetic. She was a multimillionaire learning what poverty feels like so she could build better solutions. Context changes everything. The questions continued for 20 minutes. Reporters asked about the foundation's timeline, about Calvin's role, about Marilyn's plans, about elder abuse statistics, about everything. Marilyn answered with calm precision, providing facts without drama, telling her truth without embellishment. Finally, she held up her hand. One last thing, she said. I'm announcing a challenge to other people of wealth, particularly those who've built fortunes quietly. If you have the resources to make systemic change, use them. Don't wait until you're gone to deploy your money towards solving problems. Do it now, while you can see the impact, guide the work, and hold yourself accountable for results. Wealth is a tool. Use it, or it's just numbers on a spreadsheet. She stepped back from the microphone, indicating the press conference was over. The crowd erupted with follow-up questions, but James and the security team created a path for Marilyn and Calvin to exit. They walked together through the chaos of cameras and shouted questions, not touching but moving in parallel, 2 people navigating the same disaster from different positions of damage. When they reached the car, James's Mercedes, parked discreetly at the edge of the park, Calvin stopped. Can I... he started, then couldn't finish. Can you what? Marilyn asked gently. Can I hug you? I know I don't deserve it. I know I gave up that right. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not just words. Marilyn looked at him. 47 years old, successful, privileged, reduced to a child again by the weight of his own choices. The boy who'd asked, "Are you my mama now?" was still in there somewhere, buried under corporate polish and terrible decisions, trying to find his way back. She opened her arms. Calvin fell into them, sobbing like the 3-year-old he'd been when she'd first held him. She held him through it, this broken man who'd broken her, feeling the strange calculus of love and damage, forgiveness and boundaries, second chances and permanent scars. When he finally pulled back, he wiped his face with his sleeve like a child. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go home. Wherever home is without Tessa, and you think about who you want to be," Marilyn said. "Tomorrow, you call Patricia and set up your volunteer schedule with the foundation. You show up. You do the work. You listen to people's stories without making excuses. You sit with the weight of what you did until you understand it completely. And if you can do that consistently, we'll see about the rest." "And us? You and me?" "We rebuild," Marilyn said. "Slowly, with new foundations, with honesty instead of assumptions, with boundaries instead of blind trust. It won't be what it was. It'll be something different. Maybe something better if you're willing to do the work." "I am," Calvin said. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes." "Then we'll see," Marilyn said. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "I'll call you in a few days." She got into the Mercedes. James pulled away from the curb, leaving Calvin standing in Millennium Park surrounded by reporters who'd caught the scent of a follow-up story. "How do you feel?" James asked after a few blocks of silence. "Lighter," Marilyn said. "Heavier. Both at once. Like I've set down a weight I've been carrying for 47 years, but picked up a different responsibility. The foundation. The foundation. The work. The commitment to making sure my suffering produces something that outlasts the pain." They drove through Chicago as afternoon shifted toward evening, the city glowing with the particular light that makes buildings look like monuments to human ambition. Somewhere in those buildings, people were making choices. Some were choosing kindness. Some were choosing profit. Some were choosing to see the people cleaning their offices, and some were choosing to look through them. Marilyn thought about all the invisible people she'd met in 6 weeks. The women at the shelter with their own stories of abandonment and resilience. Denise, who saw people when everyone else saw problems. The grocery store cashier, who'd called her pathetic without knowing the woman in front of her owned 6 buildings and 3 residential complexes. All of them had taught her something essential. Invisibility is a choice made by people who look, not by people who exist. She'd been visible the whole time. The world had just chosen not to see her. Now they had no choice. 3 weeks later, the Roe Foundation for Elder Dignity officially launched its emergency response program. The hotline went live at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. By noon, they'd received 47 calls from elderly people in crisis. By the end of the first week, they'd provided emergency housing for 19 people, legal advocacy for 12 financial abuse cases, and crisis intervention for countless more. Denise accepted the board position and brought a level of practical, street-level knowledge that transformed the foundation's approach. She insisted they hire formerly homeless seniors as crisis counselors, people who understood the system from the inside and could connect with callers authentically. Calvin showed up for his first volunteer shift on schedule, dressed down in jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual corporate armor. Marilyn watched from the foundation office as he sat with an 82-year-old woman whose daughter had stolen her pension, listening to her story with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was finally learning what empathy looked like when it cost something. Over the following months, Calvin worked every Tuesday and Thursday evening, plus 1 full weekend day. He transported seniors to legal appointments. He helped them fill out housing applications. He listened to stories about children who had disappeared, partners who'd died, systems that had failed. And slowly, incrementally, he transformed from the man who'd filmed his mother's humiliation into someone who understood that dignity wasn't a luxury, it was a right. Marilyn watched his progress with cautious hope, like someone nursing a plant that had nearly died back to life. They had dinner together once a month, carefully structured meetings where they talked about the foundation, about the people they'd helped, about anything except the eviction notice and the shelter and the grocery store floor. One evening in January, 6 months after the press conference, Calvin arrived at dinner with something in his hands, a small wrapped package. "I found this when I was packing up the house," he said. The house had sold for significantly more than he and Tessa had hoped to get, and per the court ruling, all proceeds had gone to the foundation. "I thought you might want it back." Marilyn unwrapped the package. Inside was a photo album she'd made when Calvin was a child. Pictures of his first day of school, his first bike, his father's funeral, his high school graduation. Every milestone documented with the devotion of someone who chose to remember. "I threw this away," Marilyn said quietly, recognizing the album she'd left behind when she'd packed her single suitcase. "When I was packing to leave. I thought you wouldn't want pictures of us." "I found it in the donation pile," Calvin said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tessa had put it there. She was going to give it to Goodwill with your other things. I pulled it out before the truck came. I've been looking at it every night for 6 months, trying to remember who I used to be, who you raised me to be." Marilyn opened the album to a photo of Calvin at 8 years old, missing his front teeth, holding up a Mother's Day card he'd made himself. The card said, "Best Mom Ever," in crayon with hearts around the edges. "Do you remember what you told me that day?" Calvin asked. "No." "You said, 'Thank you for choosing me to be your mom,' not, 'Thank you for making me this card,' not, 'I'm glad you appreciate me.' You thanked me for choosing you, like being my mother was a privilege you'd won, not a role you'd accepted." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought about that a lot while I was volunteering. Every time someone tells me their kid hasn't called in 5 years, or their son sold their house without asking, or their daughter stole their Social Security checks. I think about you thanking me for letting you be my mom. And I realize I had something most people never get, and I threw it away because I thought quarterly profits mattered more than the person who loved me first." Marilyn closed the album carefully. "You can't go back, Calvin. You can't undo what you did. You can only move forward and choose differently." "I know. That's why I wanted to show you this." He pulled out his phone. Newer than the one he'd used to film her eviction, but the weight of it seemed different in his hands. He opened an app and turned the screen toward her. It was a photo of Calvin at the foundation office, sitting beside an elderly veteran who'd been made homeless when his VA benefits got delayed. They were both smiling, the kind of genuine expression that happens when people connect authentically. "I asked someone to take this," Calvin said, "not to post it, not for content, just to remember. To prove to myself that I can be the kind of person who creates memories worth keeping instead of shame I want to forget." Marilyn looked at the photo. Her son, older and humbler and somehow more real than the polished corporate version she'd last lived with. "You're doing the work," she acknowledged. "I want to do more," Calvin said. "I want to join the board. I want to dedicate serious time and resources to this. I want—" He stopped, choosing words carefully. "I want to spend the rest of my life making sure other people don't suffer what I made you suffer. I can't fix what I did to you, but maybe I can prevent it from happening to someone else's mother." Marilyn sat with that request for a long moment. The board position would mean more responsibility, more trust, more integration into her life. It would mean believing he'd changed, not just temporarily, but fundamentally. "Not yet," she said finally. "You're doing well with the volunteer work. But board membership requires more than regret. It requires consistent demonstration of values over time. Keep showing up, keep listening, keep choosing dignity over convenience. In another year, we'll talk about it." Calvin nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. "Fair enough. I'll keep earning it." "Yes," Marilyn said, "you will." They finished dinner talking about the foundation's expansion plans. Marilyn had quietly purchased another building, a former hotel, that would be converted into transitional housing specifically for elderly people displaced by family abandonment. 50 units, fully furnished, with on-site support services and no time limits. "People need time to rebuild," Marilyn explained. "Emergency vouchers are good for getting someone off the street, but they don't address the deeper damage of being thrown away by people who were supposed to love you. We're calling it the Grace House, after the shelter where I stayed. Denise is going to run it." "That's incredible," Calvin said. "How much is the renovation going to cost?" $12 million, but it's worth it. We're creating a model that other cities can replicate. Proof that solving homelessness isn't about warehouse shelters and bureaucratic mazes. It's about treating people with dignity and giving them time to heal. Calvin reached across the table and took her hand, tentatively, like someone asking permission. I'm proud of you, Mom. I know I have no right to say that, but I am. You took something horrible and turned it into something that's going to help thousands of people. Marilyn didn't pull her hand away. She corrected gently. We're helping thousands of people. You're part of this now, not because of what you were, but because of what you're becoming. They sat like that for a moment, hands connected across a table in a quiet restaurant, two people navigating the complicated mathematics of damage and repair, accountability and grace. A year after the press conference, Marilyn stood in the completed Grace House, watching as the first residents moved into apartments that had been designed specifically for elder dignity. Wide doorways for wheelchairs, grab bars in bathrooms, community spaces that encouraged connection without requiring it. Everything thought through by people who understood that independence and support weren't opposites. Calvin was there too, helping an 87-year-old woman named Dorothy carry boxes to her new apartment. Dorothy had been evicted by her grandson who wanted to sell her condo. She'd spent 3 months in various shelters before the foundation found her. This is really mine? Dorothy kept asking. For as long as I need it? As long as you need it, Calvin confirmed. No time limits, no judgment, just a safe place to rebuild. Marilyn watched him work, seeing echoes of the boy she'd raised. The one who'd helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, who'd volunteered at church fundraisers, who'd understood instinctively that power meant responsibility to help people who had less. That boy hadn't died. He'd just been buried under ambition and bad influence, and the specific corruption that comes from believing convenience matters more than character. But he was coming back. Slowly. Imperfectly. But genuinely. Denise found Marilyn in the hallway, clipboard in hand, running the operation with the efficient competence of someone who'd been waiting her whole life for resources to match her vision. We're at capacity already, Denise said. 50 units, 50 residents, and a waiting list of 200 more. We need to scale this faster. Then we'll build another one, Marilyn said. I'm looking at properties in 3 other cities. The model works. Let's replicate it. You know what you've done, right? Denise said, her voice softer than usual. You've shown people that elder abandonment isn't inevitable, that there are solutions if someone with resources decides to give a damn. You've changed the conversation. We've changed it, Marilyn corrected. You, me, Calvin, Patricia, Sarah, James, everyone who decided that invisible people deserved to be seen. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She answered. Mrs. Rowe, this is Andrea Chen from the National Association of Elder Advocacy. We'd like to discuss your model for the Grace House concept. We have funding to pilot it in 15 cities, and we'd like the Rowe Foundation to lead the implementation. Marilyn listened as Andrea outlined a proposal that would transform her one building in Chicago into a national network. $50 million in federal funding, partnerships with housing agencies across the country, a systematic approach to elder dignity that could reach thousands. Send me the details, Marilyn said. Let's talk next week. She hung up and looked around at the building she'd bought, renovated, and filled with people society had decided didn't matter. Every apartment held a story like hers: abandonment, survival, the slow climb back to dignity. But now those stories had a different ending, not because the abandonment hadn't happened, but because someone had decided to catch them when they fell. 2 years after the press conference, Calvin officially joined the Rowe Foundation board. He'd earned it through consistent action, not dramatic gestures. 200 volunteer hours, countless conversations with displaced seniors, a complete restructuring of his life around service instead of acquisition. Tessa had filed for divorce 6 months after the press conference. She tried to claim half of the assets from the house sale, but since those proceeds had gone to the foundation per court order, there was nothing to claim. She disappeared into whatever social circle accepted influencers whose carefully curated lives had imploded publicly. Calvin lived in a modest apartment now, drove a normal car, and spent his evenings and weekends at the foundation. He'd taken a significant pay cut at work to reduce his hours, prioritizing time over income. He'd become, improbably, the kind of person Marilyn had hoped to raise, Someone who understood that worth wasn't measured in quarterly statements. They had dinner together weekly now, sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at Marilyn's penthouse overlooking the lake. The conversations were easier, more honest, built on the foundation of mutual respect instead of assumed obligation. One evening, over pasta Marilyn had made herself, she'd rediscovered cooking, finding joy in creating meals for people she chose to feed instead of institutional necessity. Calvin asked the question she'd been waiting for. "Do you regret it? Any of it? Hiding your wealth? Letting me evict you? Going to the shelter?" Marilyn thought about it carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that you needed to hit bottom before you could see clearly. But no, I don't regret the outcome. The foundation exists because I experienced homelessness personally. Grace House exists because I know what it feels like to sleep on a mat and wonder if you'll ever feel safe again. And you, the version of you sitting across from me now, you exist because you had to face what you'd done without any comfortable distance." "I'm sorry it took something so extreme to wake me up," Calvin said. "So am I. But I'm grateful you woke up at all. Some people never do." "What about us?" Calvin asked. "Are we okay?" Marilyn reached across the table and took his hand. "We're not what we were. We're something different now, something more honest maybe. I'm not the perfect mother who sacrifices everything silently. You're not the perfect son who never disappoints. We're just two people who share history and DNA from a legal document and a commitment to do better than we did before." "I can live with that," Calvin said. "Good, because that's all any of us get, the chance to live with our choices and choose better going forward." 5 years after the press conference, the Roe Foundation had expanded to 43 cities. Grace House locations existed in every major metropolitan area, providing transitional housing and support services to thousands of elderly people displaced by family abandonment. The model had been studied by sociologists, replicated by other nonprofits, and cited by policymakers as proof that elder homelessness wasn't inevitable. It was solvable if people with resources decided to solve it. Marilyn, at 75, ran the foundation with the same patient competence she'd brought to building her invisible empire. She testified before Congress about elder dignity legislation. She spoke at conferences about the economics of abandonment. She wrote op-eds that got published in national newspapers, transforming her personal story into policy arguments. And every Friday, without fail, she visited the original Grace House in Chicago, walking through the building that had started everything, talking with residents who'd found their way there from various disasters. Calvin, at 52, had become the foundation's volunteer coordinator, managing the network of people who did the hands-on work of helping displaced seniors navigate systems designed to erase them. He'd found his calling in service, discovering that the skills he'd developed in corporate settings translated perfectly to nonprofit management when applied toward helping people, instead of maximizing shareholder value. They worked together, mother and son, building something that would outlast them both. One Friday evening, as Marilyn prepared to leave Grace House, Dorothy, the 87-year-old woman who'd been one of the first residents, stopped her in the lobby. "Mrs. Rowe, can I tell you something?" "Of course." Dorothy's eyes were wet. "When my grandson threw me out, I wanted to die. I thought my life was over, that I was just taking up space waiting for the end. But this place, what you built, it gave me my life back. I'm volunteering at the community garden now. I'm teaching knitting classes. I'm not just surviving, I'm living. And I wanted you to know that you didn't just give me a roof, you gave me back my dignity." Marilyn hugged her, feeling the weight and gift of that statement. This was why she'd endured the shelter, why she'd let herself be erased temporarily, so she could come back and make sure other people didn't stay erased permanently. "Thank you for being here," Marilyn said, "for letting us help, for showing other people that there's life after abandonment." She left Grace House and walked to her car, a comfortable sedan, nothing flashy, driven by choice rather than necessity. Calvin was waiting, leaning against the passenger door. "Thought you might want company on the drive home," he said. "Always," Marilyn said. They drove through Chicago as evening settled over the city, turning buildings golden and Lake Michigan into Mercury. They talked about foundation business and resident updates and the new Grace House opening in Seattle next month. They talked like colleagues, like friends, like family that had been broken and carefully, painstakingly rebuilt into something different but functional. At a stoplight, Calvin said quietly, "I went back to the grocery store today, the one on Madison where you dropped the coins." Marilyn looked at him. "Why?" "I wanted to see it, to stand where you stood and try to understand what that felt like. There was a woman at the checkout, maybe 65, and her card was declined. Everyone was sighing and checking their phones and being impatient, and I—" He paused, his voice thick. "I paid for her groceries, and I gave her the foundation's crisis hotline number, and I told her that being in a hard place doesn't make you less valuable." "What did she say?" "She cried. Then she thanked me. Then she asked if I was religious or something." Calvin laughed shakily. "I told her no. I was just someone who'd learned the hard way that how we treat invisible people defines who we really are." Marilyn reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You're becoming who you were meant to be." "I'm trying," Calvin said. "Every day. I'm trying." The light turned green. They drove on through the city they'd both learned to see differently, not as a backdrop for their lives, but as a network of people whose stories intersected and diverged, whose choices rippled outward in ways that could break or heal, destroy, or build. Marilyn thought about the woman she'd been 6 years ago, the one who'd hidden her power, minimized herself, believed that making herself small would somehow make her son value her more. That woman was gone, transformed by necessity and choice into someone who understood that real power didn't hide. It stood in daylight and demanded better from everyone, including itself. She thought about the woman she'd been on that grocery store floor counting pennies while strangers watched. That woman was gone too, but she'd taught Marilyn something essential. Invisibility is temporary, but dignity is permanent. You can be erased from someone's life and still refuse to be erased from your own. And she thought about the woman she was now, 75 years old, worth over $150 million, running a foundation that had changed national policy and thousands of lives. A woman who'd transformed suffering into systems, pain into purpose, abandonment into advocacy. That woman, Marilyn decided, she could live with. That woman was worth becoming. That night, Marilyn stood in her penthouse overlooking the city, holding the flip phone she'd kept from her shelter days. She powered it on. She kept it charged, though she never used it anymore, and scrolled through the few contacts: the shelter's main number, Denise's work line, Calvin's contact information from that desperate call 6 years ago. She thought about deleting them, about putting the phone in a drawer and moving on completely. Instead, she left it on her desk, visible and accessible, not as a shrine to suffering, but as a reminder that every version of herself, the janitor, the mother, the homeless woman, the hidden millionaire, the public advocate, was real. None of them were mistakes. All of them had been necessary to become this final version, the one who'd learned that the power to be seen started with the decision to stop hiding. Outside her windows, Chicago glowed with a million lights, each one representing someone's story, someone's choice, someone's attempt to matter in a world that was constantly deciding who counted and who didn't. Marilyn had decided she counted, and she'd built an empire, twice, to prove that everyone else counted too. She closed her eyes and thought of Calvin, imperfect and trying. Of Denise, running Grace House with fierce compassion. Of Dorothy and the thousands like her, learning to live instead of just survive. Of every person who'd ever been counted out and decided to count themselves back in. The woman counting pennies on that grocery store floor had been carrying an empire. And now that empire was changing the world, one dignified life at a time.